Approximately 120-word hook. There is a moment, and every parent knows it, even if they never speak it aloud, when a child realizes the adults around them cannot be counted on. 7-year-old Owen Barrett hit that moment on a Tuesday afternoon in September, barefoot on burning asphalt, screaming at closed doors while his mother was dying on the bedroom floor. The neighbors heard him. They looked through their windows, and they chose to stay inside. What saved Diane Barrett's life that day wasn't the system. It wasn't the people who were supposed to care. It was 12 men the entire street feared, men with iron crosses on their backs and scars they never talked about, who stopped their engines for a barefoot child who had nowhere else to run. If this story already has your heart beating faster, stay until the end. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because the stories we tell here don't let go easy. The heat that September in Bakersfield was the kind that didn't care about you. It pressed down on everything: the asphalt, the chain-link fences, the strip of dead grass running between the sidewalk and the curb, and it made the whole neighborhood feel like something left in a car too long. By 2 in the afternoon, the concrete radiating off Mason Street was hot enough to blister bare skin. Owen Barrett was 7 years old, and he didn't have shoes on. He'd taken them off after school the way he always did, left them by the front door, and gone to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water because the bus ride had been long and the school had run out of cold drinks by noon. He could hear his mother in the back bedroom, the sound she made when her chest was getting tight. That small, truncated exhale, like a sentence being cut off mid-word. He'd heard it before. It usually passed. This time, it didn't pass. He found her on the floor between the bed and the wall, one hand pressed flat against the carpet like she was trying to push herself up, and her body had refused the instruction. Her lips had a color to them that Owen didn't have a name for, but that he understood, in the wordless and absolute way children understand things before language catches up, was wrong. The inhaler was on the nightstand. He grabbed it and pressed it into her hand, and she used it, twice, and the sound her chest made didn't change. "Mom!" She looked at him. Her eyes were clear, which was somehow worse than if they hadn't been. She knew exactly what was happening. She reached up and touched his face with one hand, a slow, deliberate movement, the way you move when every breath is a negotiation. "Go get help," she said. The words came out in pieces. He ran. The nearest house to theirs belonged to the Puentes family. Owen knew them. Mrs. Puente sometimes waved from the driveway and once gave him a juice box through the fence. He hit their door hard enough that the frame rattled and a dog somewhere inside started barking. He heard footsteps. The door opened 4 inches, held by a chain latch, and Mrs. Puente's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes moving over Owen, taking in his bare feet, his expression, the way his whole body was shaking. "My mom can't breathe," Owen said. "She's on the floor. She needs help right now." Mrs. Puente's face did something complicated. She glanced behind her into the house, then back at Owen. "Honey, did you call 911? We don't have a phone. She doesn't have one right now. The bill—" He stopped. He'd heard his mother explain this to people before, and he'd absorbed the shame that came with it without understanding why it should feel like shame. "Please, just come." "I need to get my husband," she said. "Just hold on, okay? Just hold on 1 second." She closed the door. Owen stood on the step and listened to the muffled sound of voices inside. The dog still barking, a television going somewhere. 15 seconds. 20. He hit the door again. Nothing. He turned and ran to the next house. The man who answered, Owen didn't know his name, had only ever seen him mowing the grass in a wide-brimmed hat, looked down at Owen from the top step with the expression of someone who had already categorized the situation as a problem that didn't belong to him. Owen told him again, "My mother, she can't breathe, she's on the floor." He watched the man's face move through a series of small calculations. The man said he'd call somebody. He said Owen should probably go back home and stay with her. He said help would come. He closed his door too. Owen was already running before he heard the latch click. There was a gas station at the far end of Mason Street, where the residential block ended and the road opened up onto a 4-lane that ran toward the commercial strip. It was the kind of station that was open all night, that sold coffee in styrofoam cups, and kept a rotating rack of road maps nobody bought anymore. Owen had been there with his mother to buy a gallon of milk once, when the grocery store had been too far, and it was late and she was tired. He didn't have a specific plan. He had a direction and a pair of bare feet that had already crossed 200 yards of afternoon asphalt without stopping, and he was running out of time. He heard them before he saw them. The sound came first as a vibration in the air, not loud exactly, but massive, the way thunder is massive before it becomes sound. Then it resolved into engines, plural, a sound like machinery and controlled fury, and Owen came around the corner of the last house on the block and stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. There were 12 of them. Motorcycles stretched across the gas station apron in a loose diagonal, engines still running as the last two riders pulled in. The machines were heavy and dark painted, and the riders wore leather cuts over plain shirts or long sleeves despite the heat. The kind of men who'd long since stopped making weather-based clothing decisions. One of them was pumping gas with his helmet pushed up on his head. Two more were standing near the entrance, cups of coffee in their hands, not talking. A fourth was crouched beside one of the bikes, looking at something on the rear wheel. Owen took all of this in during approximately 1 second. Then he stepped off the curb and walked straight into the path of the nearest motorcycle. The rider saw him and stopped the engine. The sound dropped out. Around the apron, the other engines idled down as the riders looked toward the commotion. A kid, a small kid, barefoot, standing in front of a motorcycle with his chest heaving and his face doing something that was close to crying but hadn't crossed over yet. "Don't start your bikes," Owen said. His voice was thin from running and the heat, but it carried. The man on the motorcycle he'd stepped in front of was broad across the shoulders, with a salt and pepper beard that hadn't been trimmed in a while, and forearms that carried the kind of sun damage you get from years of not wearing sleeves on a moving vehicle. He was looking at Owen with an expression that hadn't settled yet. Not annoyed, not alarmed, not the careful blankness of a man sizing up a situation, just present, paying attention. He cut his engine. "I'm looking at you, son," he said. "What's happening?" Not a question. Owen registered this without thinking about it. "My mom can't breathe," Owen said. "She's on the floor. I can't get anybody to help, and she can't breathe right, and her inhaler isn't working." He stopped. His throat was tight from more than just the running. "She told me to go get help. I went to 2 houses and they said they would, but they didn't." He looked at the man on the motorcycle and then at the others watching from the apron. "I don't know what else to do." The man swung off the motorcycle. He was taller standing than he'd looked sitting, and when he crouched down to Owen's eye level, the motion was easy and unhurried, like someone who had spent time around children in distress before and knew that speed looked like panic to a scared kid. He put one big hand on Owen's shoulder, not gripping, just resting there. "Ray Callahan," he said. "Road captain. How far?" "End of the block. The tan house." Ray stood up. He didn't look around for consensus. "Gus," he said. One of the men near the entrance lowered his coffee cup. He was shorter than Ray, with a compact build and close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and something in the way he moved when he heard his name, the way his attention reorganized immediately, without drama, suggested experience with high-speed triage. There was a long scar running from below his left ear down the side of his neck, pale against weather-darkened skin, and his eyes when he looked at Owen were the particular steady shade of someone who had seen real emergencies and learned not to spend his adrenaline before it was needed. "EMT?" Ray said. A question and a reminder in one word. "Former," Gus said. 5 years ago." He was already moving. "Good enough. Sal, Danny, you're with us. Tommy, stay with the bikes." The man called Tommy, young, heavy forearms, a bruise yellowing along his jawline that nobody had mentioned, nodded once and turned back to the pump. The others moved. Owen ran back the way he came, and they followed him, and if there was anything strange about the sight of 3 heavily built men in leather cuts running down a residential street in Bakersfield behind a barefoot 7-year-old, nobody on Mason Street came outside to register it. The front door of this house wasn't locked. Owen never locked it when he went out, because he didn't have a key. And he pushed through it ahead of them and went straight down the short hallway to the back bedroom. He could hear his mother's breathing before he reached the doorway. It was faster than it had been, faster and shallower, which was not an improvement. Diane Barrett was still on the floor when they came through the door. She'd made it to a sitting position, her back against the side of the bed, one hand still pressed to her chest. She was 34 years old and looked it today in a way she usually didn't. Not old exactly, but stripped of the small, careful energy she kept up for Owen's benefit, the performance of fine that parents run automatically even when they aren't. She looked up at the men in her doorway, and her expression moved through fear before landing somewhere past it. "Ambulance," she said. The word cost her. "Already called," Ray said from the hallway. He'd had his phone out before they reached the house. He didn't come in. He stayed in the hallway, visible through the doorway, giving Gus room to work. Gus went to one knee beside her, not touching yet, talking first. "I'm Gus. I'm going to ask you a few things, and I need you to try not to use more air than you have to, okay? Nod if you can." Diane nodded. "How long since the attack started?" She held up fingers. 10, maybe 12 minutes. "Inhaler type?" Owen said, "Albuterol. It's on the nightstand." He went and got it, pressing it into Gus's hand. Gus looked at the canister. He shook it, tested the weight. His face didn't change, but Owen, who was watching with the absolute focus of a child whose entire world had contracted to this room, saw something move in his expression. Not alarm, calculation. "It's nearly empty," Gus said quietly to Ray in the hallway. Ray said something into his phone that Owen didn't fully catch. Rapid, specific, the kind of language that meant something to whoever was on the other end. Gus helped Diane sit forward slightly, adjusting her angle to open her airway. He spoke to her in a low, even voice, her oxygen levels, her color, whether she'd eaten, whether this had happened before. She answered in fragments. He extracted information from each fragment without making her spend more than she could. Owen stood at the edge of the room with his back against the wall, watching, his bare feet cold against the floor tile where the bedroom carpet gave way near the doorway. There was a sound from outside. The engine sound, the massive vibration that Owen had heard at the gas station. One of the other riders, he realized, had moved one of the bikes. Then another. He didn't know why. He found out later that Ray had asked Tommy to move them down the street, out of immediate sight of the house, because the neighbors were already starting to appear at their windows. The man called Sal, wide, dark-haired, with a tattoo on the back of each hand that Owen couldn't read at this angle, stood in the hallway with Ray and said nothing, just stood there. The presence of him, Owen thought later, when he was old enough to think about it that way, was the thing that held the room's temperature down. Something in the way he stood, like a man who had learned to be very still in rooms where stillness was what was needed. Danny was younger, maybe 25, with close-cut hair and a scar through one eyebrow. And he'd stopped at the kitchen counter when they came through and filled a glass of water without being asked. And now he was standing outside the bedroom door with the glass in his hand, waiting. The ambulance siren started as a distant thing and grew. Diane's breathing had stabilized slightly. Not good, but no longer deteriorating the way it had been. Gus had her positioned correctly, was monitoring her pulse at her wrist, talking her through each breath with the particular cadence of someone who'd done this enough times that the rhythm was in his hands and his voice simultaneously. Owen watched his mother look up at this man she'd never met before. This man with the scar on his neck and the worn leather on his back, and he watched her trust him. Not choose to trust him, just do it, the way you do when there is no other option and the other options have already failed you. Outside, through the front window, Owen could see Mrs. Puente on her front porch watching the house. He could see the curtain moving in the window of the house across the street. He could see a man he didn't know standing at the corner of the sidewalk with a phone raised in his hand. He didn't know what the man was doing with the phone. Not yet. Ray stepped into the bedroom doorway and looked at Owen. "You did good," he said. The words were plain, undecorated, and they landed in Owen's chest like a hand steadying him. "Paramedics are 2 minutes out. They're going to take care of your mom. I need you to do one more hard thing." Owen looked at him. "Stay right here and let them work," Ray said. "Don't get in the way. Don't panic. Don't run anywhere else. You've done the running. Now you just hold still." Owen nodded. "Good," Ray said. 2 minutes later, the paramedics came through the front door. They came in fast and efficient, equipment rolling, voices clipped and purposeful, the practiced economy of people who did this for money and did it well. Gus got up from the floor and stepped back without being asked, moving out of the working radius, pulling Owen with him into the hallway. He gave the lead paramedic a rapid, quiet summary. Duration, inhaler status, position when found, current respiratory rate, and the paramedic took it without commenting, already moving. Owen stood in the hallway with Gus's hand on his shoulder, that same quality of presence as the man's voice, not heavy, just steady, and watched through the bedroom doorway as the paramedics worked on his mother. The glass of water Danny had poured was still on the counter. One of the motorcycle engines outside turned over once and went quiet. The house smelled like the carpet cleaner his mother used on Saturdays, and something else Owen couldn't name. Adrenaline, maybe, or fear metabolizing into something less sharp. Across the street, the man with his phone raised was still standing there. And then there were police lights in the window. Owen felt something change in the hallway around him. A shift in attention, in weight, in the careful stillness of the two men still inside the house. Sal, who had been standing near the door, straightened up almost imperceptibly. Ray, who'd been talking quietly into his phone again in the living room, stopped talking. The front door opened without a knock. 2 officers, one hand each resting near the sidearm, eyes going around the room with the practiced speed of people expecting the worst and bracing to meet it. Finding, instead, a kid in the hallway, a former EMT. 2 bikers standing still with their hands visible, and the sound of paramedics working down the hall. "What's the situation?" the first officer said, not asking any one person, asking the room. Ray stepped into the doorway between the living room and the hall, and the officer's hand moved, a reflex, before stopping. "Medical emergency," Ray said. "Asthma attack. We called it in. Paramedics are with her now." The officer looked at Ray, at the leather cut, at Sal, at Danny, at Owen, standing in the hallway with bare feet on the linoleum and his eyes moving between the officers and the bikers with an expression no 7-year-old's face should have to organize. "We got a report of a—" The officer stopped, selected his words. "We got a report of a group of men with this child." Owen understood then what the man across the street had been doing with his phone. He understood what the report had said. He looked at the officer, and he felt something happen in his chest. Not anger, exactly. Not the hot, clean thing you could cry your way through. Something older. Something that settled into his ribs like concrete and had no name he would find until he was much older. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the lead paramedic came out of the bedroom doorway and said, calm as weather, "We're going to transport. Who's responsible for the child?" Everyone in the room looked at Owen. Owen looked at Ray. Ray looked back at him, and his expression was the same thing it had been from the beginning, just present, just paying attention. And he said quietly, to the officer standing between them, "The boy called for help. We came. That's the whole story. You can sort the rest out later. Right now his mother needs to get to a hospital." The officer looked at Owen. "Is that true, son?" he said. Owen said yes. And then he said the thing that would stay with people who were in that hallway for the rest of their lives. The thing that got repeated in the weeks after in a way that embarrassed him later because he hadn't meant it as anything other than the plain truth. They were the only ones who came. The paramedics moved Diane Barrett to the gurney. The wheels of it made a sound on the bedroom carpet, and then a different sound on the linoleum, and then Owen was outside on the front step in the September heat, watching his mother being loaded into the back of the ambulance, and the whole of Mason Street was watching from behind its curtains and its porch railings, and the police were still inside the house, and somewhere down the block the motorcycles were parked in a loose diagonal, the way they had been at the gas station. Ray Callahan came out and stood beside Owen on the step, and they both watched the ambulance doors close. "Can I go with her?" Owen said. "They won't take you in the ambulance," Ray said, "but we'll get you there." Owen looked up at him. "You're going to drive me. Unless you've got someone else to call." Owen didn't answer that. He didn't need to. They went back inside to tell the officers where they were going, and as they pushed through the front door into the cool dim of the house, Owen heard one of the officers say something low to the other. Not directed at any of them, just the private sound of someone reconsidering something they'd been certain of a moment ago. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the tone. And in the bedroom, on the floor between the bed and the wall where his mother had been lying 20 minutes ago, the rescue inhaler was still there, nearly empty. Not quite. Nobody had moved it. Owen didn't know why he noticed that. He didn't know why it felt, in that moment, like the most important thing in the room. He would spend the next 4 hours sitting under fluorescent lights in a hospital waiting room, and the answer would come to him slowly, in the way things came to him. Sideways, in the small hours, when the adults around him thought he was sleeping. The inhaler was nearly empty because his mother had been fighting for a long time before she went down. Fighting quietly, managing it alone, not wanting to worry him, not wanting to be a burden, not wanting to need. And the doors had stayed closed because that was what doors did. And the men on the motorcycles had come because something in them, something broken or built, or both, would not let a child's voice go unanswered. Owen didn't know their stories yet, didn't know what Gus had lost, or what Ray carried, or what the bruise on Tommy's jaw meant, or why Sal stood so still in rooms where other men fidgeted. But he was going to find out. Outside, an engine turned over. Then another. And in the hallway of the house on Mason Street, one of the officers picked up the rescue inhaler from the bedroom floor, turned it over in his hand, and set it back down. He didn't say anything. But his face, when Owen caught a glimpse of it through the doorway, had the particular set of a man reckoning with the distance between what he'd expected to find and what he'd actually walked into. It wasn't a comfortable look. It wasn't supposed to be. The hospital waiting room smelled like floor wax and old coffee and the particular kind of anxiety that settles into furniture after years of absorbing it. The chairs were plastic, molded into shapes that suggested comfort without providing it, bolted to each other in rows of 4. The overhead lights were fluorescent and merciless, and they made everyone in the room look slightly unwell, which in a hospital waiting room was either appropriate or cruel, depending on how you looked at it. Owen Barrett sat in the third chair from the left, in the second row, and stared at the door that led to the treatment area. He had been staring at it for 40 minutes. It had not opened toward him once. Ray Callahan sat 2 chairs to his left. Not close enough to crowd him, close enough to be there. Sal was standing near the vending machine with his arms crossed and his eyes on the room's entrance. He hadn't bought anything from the machine. He was just near it, the way a piece of furniture is near a wall. Functionally, without explanation. Gus was at the nurse's station. He'd been there for 15 minutes, speaking to a woman in scrubs with the careful, deliberate energy of someone who knew exactly how much information a civilian could extract from hospital staff, and was operating at the exact upper edge of that limit. Danny was outside. Owen could see him through the glass doors at the waiting room entrance, standing in the parking lot with a cigarette going, watching the street. Nobody had told Owen to sit down. Nobody had told him what to do at all. He'd simply sat, and the others had arranged themselves around him in a loose orbit that felt, if he'd had the language for it, like a perimeter. He didn't have the language for it. He was 7. But he felt it. The fluorescent light above him buzzed once, dipped, recovered. Owen watched the treatment door. His bare feet were cold against the linoleum. Someone had offered him a pair of socks from a bag in one of the motorcycle's saddlebags. He hadn't asked whose, and he was wearing them now, thick wool ones that bunched at the ankle and were several sizes too large. They were the most important thing anyone had given him in the last 2 hours, and he couldn't have explained why. Ray shifted in his chair. He didn't say anything. He picked up a magazine from the low table beside him, looked at it without reading it, and put it back. "She going to be okay?" Owen said. Ray took a moment, not hesitating, selecting. "She was breathing better when they took her in," he said. "That matters." "That's not what I asked." Ray looked at him. The boy was staring at the treatment door, not at Ray, and his voice had the flat, careful quality of someone who'd learned early that adults gave you shapes of answers instead of actual ones, and who'd decided he was done accepting the shape. "No," Ray said, "it's not. I don't know if she's going to be okay. I'm not going to tell you she is just to make this minute easier." Owen nodded, a single, small movement. "Okay," he said. They sat. The treatment door opened twice in the next 20 minutes. Neither time was for Diane Barrett. Owen tracked each opening with his whole body, a slight forward lean that he corrected immediately when he saw it wasn't her nurse. Gus came back from the nurse's station and sat in the chair on Owen's right. He smelled like cigarette smoke and antiseptic, and something underneath both that Owen couldn't categorize. He leaned his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor. "They've got her on a nebulizer," Gus said. "Albuterol and ipratropium. Her oxygen is coming up." Owen understood maybe half of that. He understood the part that meant his mother was breathing. "Thank you," he said. Gus didn't respond to that. He just nodded once at the floor, like the thanks was something he'd received and put somewhere without opening it. Ray was watching Gus. Owen, who was watching everything, saw this. Saw something pass between the two men that wasn't a look exactly. More like a current, an acknowledgement of something that existed between them outside of this room. Then the front doors opened and Officer Delaney walked in. He was the younger of the two officers who'd come to the house, the one who'd done most of the talking, the one whose hand had moved toward his sidearm when Ray stepped into the doorway. He was in his early 30s, with a regulation haircut and the particular posture of someone who'd been told twice in the last hour to handle something carefully and was working very hard at it. He stopped just inside the doors and looked at the waiting room and found what he was looking for. He walked toward them. Sal, by the vending machine, didn't move, but his arms uncrossed. Danny, outside, had turned to watch through the glass. "Mr. Callahan," Officer Delaney said. Ray looked up. "Officer, I need a few minutes." "The boy stays here," Ray said. "Not a negotiation." Delaney looked at Owen. Owen looked back at him with an expression that Ray would describe later, to Gus, in a parking lot at midnight, as the face of someone who had aged 10 years in an afternoon and wasn't entirely sorry about it. "He can stay," Delaney said. He pulled a chair over from the adjacent row and sat down, which put him at eye level instead of standing over them. Owen noted this. He'd noticed Ray do something similar when he'd crouched in the parking lot at the gas station. He filed it somewhere. "We ran your plates," Delaney said to Ray. "All of you." "I know," Ray said. "Your record is mine," Ray said. "Is that what you came here to tell me?" Delaney stopped, restarted. "Mr. Holt, the neighbor across the street, he called it in as a kidnapping, his words. I'm required to follow up." "You're following up," Ray said. "What do you want to know?" "Were you in contact with this child before today?" "No." "Did anyone in your group know the mother?" "No." "And your account of how this started?" "The boy came to us," Ray said. "End of account." Delaney looked at Owen again. "Son, is that accurate? You approached these men yourself?" Owen said, "I told you that at the house." "I know. I need you to tell me again." "I ran to the gas station because nobody else helped. Mrs. Puente said she'd get her husband, and then she didn't open the door again. The man with the hat said he'd call someone. Neither of them came." He paused. Let the officer have those 2 sentences. "These men came. That's what happened." Delaney wrote something in a small notebook. The scratch of the pen was the loudest sound in the immediate area for a moment. "Mr. Callahan," he said without looking up. "Mr. Merritt's previous employment, the EMT certification, lapsed," Gus said from Owen's right. Delaney looked at him. "My certification lapsed 18 months ago," Gus said. "I disclosed that to your paramedics when they came in. Everything I did was basic stabilization and positioning. I didn't perform any procedure that required active certification." He said it the way a man says something he has already said to official ears before, precisely, without effect, with the weary accuracy of someone who knows exactly which words matter and which ones will be used against him. Delaney looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote something else. "Someone took photos," Delaney said, "of the bikes outside the house. Mr. Holt posted them." The waiting room was quiet around this. The television in the corner was running the local news on mute with closed captions. A woman 3 rows back was reading something on her phone. A child, younger than Owen, was asleep across 2 chairs with a blanket tucked around him. "Posted them where?" Ray said. Social media, neighborhood app. Delaney's pen stopped. He wrote that members of an outlaw motorcycle club had entered a family home with a child. That post has been shared 140 times in the last hour. Owen watched Ray's face. Nothing changed on it. Not a muscle. But something in the quality of his stillness shifted. The stillness became a choice, instead of just a state, and the difference between those two things was considerable. "That's going to be a problem," Ray said. It wasn't a question. Sal by the vending machine made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Ray looked at him and Sal shook his head, a single tight movement, which Ray answered with a slight tilt of his chin. "What kind of problem?" Owen said. All three men looked at him. He was 7 years old and he was looking at Ray Callahan with the directness of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 hours, that he was done being managed. Ray said, "The kind that takes a while to explain." "I've got time," Owen said. "She's not out yet." Gus made a sound, not a laugh, something close to it, compressed into a single exhale. Ray looked at the treatment door, then at Owen. "People see something they don't understand," he said. "They make a story for it. Sometimes the story is easier for them than the truth." "Mr. Holt saw what happened," Owen said. "He was outside. He saw men like us at a house on his street. The rest he filled in." Owen considered this. Then, "He filled in wrong." "He did," Ray said. "But wrong spreads faster than right. Always has." Delaney capped his pen. He looked between Owen and Ray with an expression that Owen would not have had a word for then, but would later describe as someone watching a thing and revising their opinion of it in real time. "I'll need contact information for each of you," Delaney said. "Phones, current addresses." He stood up, returned the chair to its row. "I'm not filing a kidnapping report, but there may be follow-up questions once we—" He stopped, rerouted. "Depending on how this post develops." "My number's already in your dispatch system," Ray said. "I called it in." Delaney looked at him. "I know," Delaney said. He left. Danny came back in from the parking lot when the officer's cruiser pulled out. He stood near the doors, smelling of cigarette smoke, and looked at Ray with a question he didn't ask aloud. Ray shook his head. Danny nodded and went back to his position near the vending machine with Sal, the two of them settling back into the low-voltage watchfulness they'd been running since the house. Owen's feet were cold again, even through the wool socks. He pressed them flat against the linoleum. His mother's face on the floor of the bedroom was still the first image he saw when he closed his eyes, so he kept them open. "Gus," he said. Gus looked at him. "Why did your certification lapse?" The question sat in the air. Sal and Danny, across the room, went very still in the particular way of men who were not going to comment, but were listening to everything. Ray didn't look at Gus. He looked at the treatment door. Gus took a long breath in through his nose and let it out slow. He bent forward, forearms on knees, and turned a ring on his right hand. A plain band, silver, worn smooth on the inner edge, 3 times around his finger without looking at it. "That," he said, "is a longer conversation." "I've got time," Owen said again. Gus looked at him. Something moved through his face, not grief exactly, something older than grief, and more settled. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know you do." He didn't say anything else, but he didn't look away either. And Owen, who had learned in 7 years to read the difference between someone shutting a door and someone standing in a doorway deciding, understood that the story was there, that it wasn't going anywhere, that it would come when it came. He nodded and looked back at the treatment door. The hour turned and the waiting room thinned. The woman with the phone left. The sleeping child was carried out by a man who arrived looking terrified and left looking like someone who'd been handed his life back. A different nurse came to the desk, and the first one gathered her things and went home. At some point, a vending machine coffee appeared beside Owen's chair. He didn't see who put it there. It was the kind of coffee that tasted like hot cardboard, but it was warm, and he held the cup with both hands and felt the heat move up through his palms and into his wrists, and he drank it in small, deliberate sips. Outside, the September sun had gone sideways and was now doing the orange thing it did in the last hour before dark, throwing long shadows across the parking lot and turning the chrome on the bikes, 2 of them, pulled into the far corner of the lot where they were visible from the waiting room windows, into something that looked almost liquid. Owen watched the light change on the chrome. He was still watching it when Ray's phone went off. Ray looked at the screen. He stood up. He walked to the far corner of the waiting room, turned his back to the room, and took the call. Owen watched him, saw the set of his shoulders, saw the moment, 40 seconds into the conversation, when something changed in the line of Ray's spine, a tightening, subtle, the kind of adjustment a body makes when news arrives that is not a surprise but is still, in some way, a blow. Ray came back. He sat down. He put his phone face down on his knee. "What?" Owen said. Ray looked at him. "The Post," he said. "It's not just the neighborhood app anymore." Sal had heard. He was already moving, pulling out his own phone. Danny looked over Sal's shoulder at the screen, and his face did the thing faces do when a number that was manageable becomes a number that isn't. "How many?" Gus said. "Local news picked it up," Ray said. Station ran a segment. "Residents concerned as motorcycle club enters family home." He paused. "They used the photos from the Post." Owen processed this slowly, the way you process something that is both entirely new and somehow not surprising at all. "They don't know what happened," he said. "No," Ray said. "Are you going to tell them?" Ray was quiet for a moment. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Ray turned to look at Owen directly. "Because a man like me telling people his version of what happened in a house on their street—" He stopped, chose. "It matters who's doing the telling, and it matters what they already think before you open your mouth." Owen looked at him. "You mean because of what you look like?" "Because of what I am." Owen turned this over. Outside, the light had gone from orange to red, and the chrome on the motorcycles had gone dark. "What are you?" Owen said. Ray looked at him for a long time, long enough that Gus looked over and Sal stopped reading his phone. "Someone who made choices," Ray said, "a long time ago, and not so long ago. And some of those choices left marks. And those marks mean something to people before I've said a single word." Owen was quiet. "That's not fair," he said. "No," Ray said, "but you came anyway, knowing that." Ray didn't answer that. He looked at the treatment door. Owen looked at it too. Then it opened. A woman in scrubs. Not the nurse who'd been at the desk, someone else. Someone whose demeanor had the particular density of a person who delivered news for a living and had built a controlled surface over whatever she'd originally felt about that, came through and looked around the waiting room and found Owen. She crossed to him. "Are you Owen?" she said. "Yes." "Your mom is asking for you." Owen stood up. The coffee cup tipped and Gus caught it before it hit the floor. Owen was already moving toward the door, and the nurse was holding it open, and the fluorescent light from beyond it was different from the waiting room fluorescent, brighter and more purposeful, and Owen went through without looking back. But he heard Ray, behind him, say something quiet to Sal. He didn't catch all of it. He caught the last 4 words. "Watch the parking lot." He didn't know what that meant yet. He would. Diane Barrett was in a bay at the end of a short corridor, curtain half drawn, a machine beside the bed tracking her oxygen saturation in soft green numbers. She was propped up at an angle and she had color in her face again. Actual color, not the gray-blue that Owen had found on the bedroom floor. She was still hooked to the nebulizer mask, but it was sitting on her chin now, not over her mouth, which meant she was breathing on her own well enough to move it. When Owen came through the curtain, she looked at him, and her face did something it almost never did in front of him. It broke, just briefly, and then it put itself back together. "Hey, baby," she said. Owen went to the side of the bed, and she put her arm around him, and he stood there with his face pressed against her shoulder, and he breathed her in. Familiar, underneath the hospital smell, underneath the antiseptic and the mask and the IV tape. Still her. Still there. He didn't cry. He'd run out of the capacity for it somewhere around the second closed door on Mason Street and hadn't gotten it back yet. "I'm okay," she said, into his hair. "I know," he said. "Who did you—" She stopped, breathed. "Who brought you here?" The nurse said, "Some men," Owen said. "From the gas station. They helped." Diane was quiet. He could hear her lungs, not the grinding, terrible sound from the bedroom floor, but still working, still a little effortful. She'd been fighting this for a long time, fighting it quietly. He knew that now in a way he hadn't known it this morning. "What men?" she said. "Bikers," Owen said. "There's 3 of them in the waiting room. One of them's an EMT. He's the one who kept you breathing until the paramedics came." Diane's arm around him went through a change he could feel without seeing, a kind of recalibration, a tension that arrived and then, slowly, didn't leave but rearranged itself into something more complex. "They're still here?" she said. "They said they'd stay until—" He stopped. He hadn't actually been told this. He'd just known it. "They're just here," he said. Diane looked at the curtain, at the closed fabric of it, the inch of corridor visible at the edge. Something moved through her face, something Owen didn't have the full map of yet, an adult geography he was just beginning to learn the edges of. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." Owen pulled back far enough to see her face. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. He told her about the Post, about the news segment, about Mr. Holt and the photos and the 140 shares that were now more. He told it plainly, the way he'd learned to tell his mother hard things, without softening it, because she didn't like it when people softened things, because she'd told him once that soft edges made it harder to see what you were actually dealing with. She listened. Her oxygen numbers dipped once and came back. When he finished, she closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and looked at the ceiling. "They helped my boy," she said. Not to Owen, to the ceiling. "And now they're going to catch hell for it." Owen didn't say anything. "Go get them," Diane said. Owen looked at her. "All of them?" "The one who helped me breathe," she said. "And whoever's in charge." Owen went back through the curtain. He walked down the corridor and pushed through the door into the waiting room and went to Ray first, because Ray was in charge. That much was obvious to anyone. And then he looked at Gus. "She wants to see you," Owen said. "Both of you." Ray looked at Gus. Gus looked at Ray. Something passed between them, not surprise. Something more like the recognition of a moment they'd both, somewhere in the last 2 hours, been quietly bracing for. They stood. Sal caught Ray's eye as they moved toward the corridor door, and Ray gave him a short nod. The kind of nod that meant "I know" and "stay sharp" and "we'll talk later," compressed into a single movement. They went through the door. Owen walked between them down the corridor toward the bay where his mother was, and the sound their boots made on the hospital floor was the heaviest, most deliberate sound in the building, and the fluorescent lights made the patches on their cuts flat and strange-looking, like artifacts from another world pressing against the antiseptic reality of this one. They reached the curtain. Ray put his hand on it, stopped, looked at Owen. Owen pulled the curtain back. Diane Barrett looked at the 2 men in her doorway with the particular expression of someone who has been brought to the edge of what they thought they understood about the world and is standing at that edge taking a very careful look at what's below. She looked at Gus first, at the scar on his neck, at his hands. "You kept her breathing," she said. Gus said, "I positioned her and monitored her until the paramedics arrived. They did the work." "Don't do that," Diane said. Gus looked at her. "Don't minimize it," she said. "I know what my lungs felt like before you got there. I know what they felt like after. Don't." Her voice was still rough from the attack, the consonants working a little harder than usual, but it was steady. "You saved my life. I need you to let me say that." Gus was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved once. "Okay," he said. She looked at Ray. "And you're in charge." "Road captain," Ray said. "Ray Callahan. Diane Barrett." She looked at him for a long moment. "My son came to you." He did. "He came to you because nobody else came." Ray said nothing. The sentence didn't need a response. It wasn't a question. It was a woman holding up what had happened and looking at it clearly, the way she'd taught her son to do. "I'm going to need," Diane said carefully, "to understand what's happening with the news." Ray looked at Owen. Owen said, "I told her." Ray looked back at Diane. "Then you know as much as I do right now." "What's going to happen to you," she said, "because of this?" "That's not your concern," Ray said. "It is," she said. It became my concern the minute you walked into my house. Something shifted in Ray's expression. Not warmth exactly. More like the recognition of someone who used language the same way he did. Precisely, without decoration, with the intention of being understood rather than liked. We've dealt with worse press, he said. I'm not talking about press, Diane said. I'm talking about what comes after press. I know how these things go. I grew up in neighborhoods where I watched how these things go. She held his gaze. Are you safe? Ray was quiet for 3 seconds. We're watching the situation, he said. It was not a yes. Owen heard this. He heard it the way he'd heard everything in the last 5 hours. Fully, without softening, with the terrible clarity of a child whose defenses hadn't calcified yet around the places where truth came through. And then Ray's phone went off. He looked at the screen. Something in his face went flat and hard in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the way a lake goes flat before a storm doesn't warn you. He looked at Gus. Gus was already reading the same thing on his own phone, whatever it was. Diane watched them. Owen watched them. Tell me, Diane said. Ray looked at her. Then he looked at Owen. He seemed to make a decision about something, a door he'd been standing in front of swinging one way or the other. There are people outside, he said. What kind of people? Diane said. Ray put his phone in his pocket. The kind, he said, that followed the post. Outside in the parking lot, Sal was standing between the 2 motorcycles and the entrance to the hospital, and his arms were no longer crossed, and the look on his face through the glass doors was the look of a man who had run the math and arrived at a number he didn't like. And there were 4 vehicles at the far end of the lot that hadn't been there an hour ago, engines off, lights off, the shapes of people visible inside them in the last of the dying September light. Ray was at the window before Diane finished processing what he'd said. He stood at the edge of the curtain, not touching it, looking through the narrow gap between the fabric and the wall at the angle of corridor that gave him a partial sightline to the lobby glass. From here, he could see Sal. Sal's back, specifically, and the set of it, the particular architecture of a man who had decided, in the last 60 seconds, that the situation had changed categories. How many? Gus said. He was already moving to the other side of the window, the opposite angle. 4 vehicles. Could be more. Ray didn't look away from the glass. Sal would have counted twice before he sent the text. Who are they? Diane said. Neither man answered immediately, which was itself an answer. Ray, Diane said. He turned from the window, looked at her in the bed with the oxygen monitor on her finger and the IV in her arm, and her son standing at the foot of the mattress, watching the adults in the room with that face, that terrible, clear 7-year-old face that didn't miss anything. The post identified our club by name, Ray said. Identified the neighborhood. Identified the hospital, probably, because Holt would have heard the paramedics say where they were taking you. And the people in those cars, Diane said. Could be nothing, Ray said. Could be people who saw the segment and wanted a look. But, Diane said. Ray's jaw moved. There are groups that watch for situations like this, situations where a club gets negative press fast. They move on it. What kind of groups? The kind, Gus said from the window, that aren't interested in the actual story. Owen said, rival clubs. Both men looked at him. I'm not stupid, Owen said. Ray looked at Gus. Gus looked at the floor. Possibly, Ray said to Owen. To his credit, he said it straight. No softening. The boy had earned that. Possibly rival clubs. Possibly people with a personal problem with someone in our group. Possibly just angry neighbors who drove 40 minutes because the post made them angry. He paused. We don't know yet. Sal's finding out. And until he does, Diane said. Until he does, nobody goes to that parking lot alone. Diane looked at Owen. Owen looked back at her. Something passed between them that the 2 bikers in the room had the decency to not try to read. I need to make a call, Ray said. Gus, stay here. He went through the curtain without waiting for a response. Gus moved to the chair beside Diane's bed and sat. He put his forearms on his knees in the posture Owen had already cataloged as his default. Forward, compact, the posture of a man who was always, on some level, ready to move. He looked at the floor. "How long has she been bad?" he said. Not to anyone specific, to the room. Diane looked at him. "Excuse me?" "The asthma. How long has it been this uncontrolled?" A pause. 6 months, she said. "Maybe 8. Rescue inhaler only? No maintenance medication?" Diane's jaw tightened slightly. The tightening of someone who knew the right answer and knew they hadn't been doing it. "The maintenance inhaler is expensive," she said. "The rescue one isn't." Gus nodded. He didn't comment on this, which Diane registered. The absence of judgment, she would think about later, was its own kind of shock. "There's a program," he said, "pharmaceutical assistance. For people in your situation. The medication is free. You apply with proof of income." He turned the ring on his finger. "Once. I can get you the information." "Why do you know about that?" Diane said. Gus looked at her. "Because I used to help people get into it," he said. "When I was still—" He stopped, chose a different door. "I know about it. That's enough." Diane studied him, the scar on his neck, the ring on his finger, plain and worn, the careful, specific way he parceled out information about himself, enough to establish context, not enough to invite the next question. "You were an EMT," she said. "Yes." "And now you're not." "No." "What happened?" Gus looked at the floor again. His hands came together between his knees, fingers interlaced, and he looked at them the way you look at something you've been carrying so long you've stopped seeing it as weight and started seeing it as just part of you. "I lost a patient," he said. "Kid, 16 years old, skateboard accident, brain bleed. We did everything right and he still—" He stopped. The ring turned. His mother was there. She was at the scene. She saw everything. He paused. "After, I kept seeing the mother, kept seeing her face when I had to tell her. Every call after that I'd see her, start making mistakes, not big ones, small ones, the kind only you know about. But I knew." He looked up at Diane. "I turned in my certification before I hurt someone with the small mistakes." Diane was quiet for a moment. "That's not a failure," she said. "Felt like one. You walked away because you were honest enough to know your limits. That's not what failure looks like." Gus looked at her for a long moment. The particular look of someone receiving something they'd decided a long time ago they didn't deserve. "You're very direct," he said. "I have a 7-year-old, Diane said. "You stop having the luxury of being indirect." From the corner of the room, Owen said, "How'd you end up with them?" Gus looked at him. "With the club?" "Yeah." Gus turned the ring once more. "Ray found me," he said. 3 years ago. I was in bad shape. Different kind of bad than your mom's bad today, but bad." He looked at the floor. He didn't ask me any questions. He just said there was a seat if I wanted it. He paused. "I wanted it." "Why?" Owen said. "Because I was tired of being alone with what I knew about myself," Gus said. "And because Ray Callahan doesn't ask questions you're not ready to answer, which is a rarer quality than you'd think." Owen considered this. "What's in the parking lot?" he said. Gus looked at him. "You said Ray's finding out," Owen said. "But you already know something. You looked at the window different than he did." Gus held his gaze. Then he looked at Diane, who was watching with an expression that said, "He's right, and I want to know too." Gus took a long breath. "There's a club called the Varka Kings," he said, "out of Fresno. They've had a problem with us for 2 years, dispute over territory, not the kind of territory that goes to court." He said this plainly, without embellishment. "They've been waiting for a situation where we're exposed, where we're in a location that's not ours, without numbers." He looked at the window. A hospital parking lot, at night, with 4 of us against however many they brought. That's the situation. The monitor beeped once. Diane's oxygen was holding at 94. "You came here anyway?" she said. "We didn't know they'd be here." "But you knew they might be watching." Gus looked at her. "Not until the news segment, no. But after the segment..." After the segment, we knew it was possible. He met her eyes. We decided it didn't change anything. Diane looked at him for a long time. You decided that while sitting in my waiting room, she said, while my son was sitting 2 chairs away. Gus said, yes. Why? Gus was quiet. He turned the ring one more time. Then he stopped turning it and just held his hands together. Because he asked us not to start our bikes, he said, and we said we wouldn't, and that means we stay. The curtain moved. Ray came back through it. His face was the same controlled surface it had been all afternoon, but there was something running underneath it now, something Owen could see in the small muscles around his eyes, the way you see current beneath ice. Sal counted 7, he said. 3 vehicles, not 4. One of them we know. Gus looked up sharply. Maddox, Ray said. Gus's face went through something fast and then went still again. Who's Maddox? Diane said. Ray looked at Gus. A question that wasn't a question. A permission being requested. Gus nodded, once. Ray looked at Diane. He's the reason my road captain before Gus isn't riding anymore, he said. Accident on the highway 2 years ago. Forced off the road. A pause that had weight in it. It wasn't an accident. Is he out there for you? Diane said. Or for all of you? For me, Ray said. Gus is extra. Extra, Gus said flatly. Bonus, Ray said, with the particular tone of a man making a very small, very deliberate joke at the worst possible time, because the alternative was something neither of them wanted to name. Owen had been sitting on the edge of the windowsill. Now he stood up. What are you going to do? He said. We're going to manage it, Ray said. That's not an answer. Ray looked at him, really looked at him, the full, considering attention he'd been giving the boy all afternoon, as though Owen had long ago passed whatever threshold Ray used to determine who got to hear the real version of things. We're going to get you and your mother out of here through the side entrance, Ray said. Sal's already got a vehicle arranged. Not one of ours, a clean car, a friend. You'll go home. Someone will stay with you. And you, Owen said, will handle the parking lot. That means you're going out to them. It means we're not going to sit inside a hospital and wait for them to come in, Ray said. We manage it on our terms, or we don't manage it. Owen looked at him. Something in the boy's face was doing a complicated thing. Not fear, not exactly. The particular anguish of someone who has found the people who came when everyone else didn't, and is now watching those people walk towards something he cannot follow them into and cannot stop. If you go out there, Owen started. Hey, Ray said. His voice dropped. Not soft exactly, but lower. The register he'd used in the parking lot when he crouched down. Look at me. Owen looked at him. We've been doing this a long time, Ray said. All of us. We know how to handle Maddox and we know how to handle what's in that parking lot. What I need from you right now is the same thing I needed from you in the house. You remember what that was? Owen said, Stay still. Stay still, Ray said. Let us work. Owen's jaw was tight. He nodded. Ray turned to Diane. I'm sorry this came to your door, he said. None of this. The post, Maddox, any of it. This wasn't supposed to touch you. Diane looked at him. You're apologizing for helping me. I'm apologizing that helping you created a complication for you. The complication was already there, Diane said. The complication has been there since your neighbor decided you were a headline before you were a person. That's not on you. Ray didn't respond to that. He pressed his mouth together once, the compressed acknowledgement of a man who would not let himself receive it in front of other people. He turned to Gus. 5 minutes, he said. Gus stood. Then Ray's phone went off again. He looked at the screen and something happened in his face that Owen had not seen all day. Not calculation, not controlled assessment, not the steady forward motion of a man who had run worse situations than this one. He went still. What? Gus said. Ray held the screen up. Gus read it. His face went through the same sequence and stopped at the same place. What is it? Diane said. Ray lowered the phone. He looked at the curtain, beyond it, at the corridor, the lobby glass, the parking lot beyond. That's not Maddox's crew, he said. It's not the Varka Kings either. Then who? Gus said. Sheriff's Department, Ray said. 6 units. They just pulled in behind Maddox's vehicles. The room took a breath. That's good, Diane said. That means someone called it in, Ray said. Someone who knew about Maddox and knew about the parking lot and knew the precise moment to call it in. He looked at Gus. That's not a coincidence. Someone fed them the tip. Fed them the tip, and then what? Gus said. They're going to want to talk to me, Ray said, about the house, about the neighborhood, about this afternoon. And if Maddox is out there when they do, he's going to make sure they hear his version of this afternoon before I get a word in. He put his phone in his pocket. Someone set this up. Set what up? Diane said. The Post, the news segment. Maddox in that parking lot. The sheriff's department arriving at exactly the wrong moment. Ray's voice was level, but it was the level of a man working very hard at level. This was built. This afternoon was built. Gus said, You're saying someone knew we'd stop. I'm saying someone knew we were on that route, Ray said. Knew we'd stop at that station, knew what would happen if we got caught up in a situation like this with cameras on it. He looked at Owen. I'm sorry. Owen said, You're not sorry. Ray looked at him. You're not sorry, Owen said again. You're angry, and I want to know who you're angry at. Ray held his gaze for 3 long seconds. So do I, he said. He went through the curtain. Gus turned to Diane. The side exit. Gus, Diane said. He stopped. The man you said, Maddox. He forced Ray's road captain off the road. Yes. And he's in the parking lot right now. Yes. Diane's hands were folded on the blanket. Her oxygen numbers were at 95. Her voice, when she used it, was the voice of a woman who had spent years making decisions with inadequate information in situations where the margin for error was small. What does he want? She said. Tonight, Gus said. Or generally. Tonight. Gus thought about it. The honest version. He wants Ray arrested or hurt. Tonight, the way it's set up, arrested is more useful to him. Arrested means the story the news told becomes the permanent story. It means no one ever hears what actually happened in your house today. Diane absorbed this. And if Ray goes out there, she said, he walks into exactly what Maddox needs him to walk into, Gus said. Bikers in a hospital parking lot, rival crew, sheriff's department arriving. It doesn't matter what Ray says. It matters what it looks like. Then he shouldn't go out, Diane said. He's going to go out, Gus said, because Ray Callahan doesn't let other people carry things that belong to him. Diane looked at the curtain. Owen was looking at it too. The curtain moved, and it wasn't Ray. It was Danny, the youngest one, the one with the scar through his eyebrow, and he was moving with a different energy than he'd been carrying all afternoon. Not the watchful stillness, but something kinetic, something that had been waiting for a reason. They're asking for Ray by name, Danny said. Out front. Sheriff's deputy at the entrance. They want him outside. Who's they? Gus said. Deputy said his name, then said Maddox asked him to extend the invitation personally. The room went very quiet. Owen turned to Gus. Maddox has a deputy. Gus didn't answer that. His jaw moved. He has a deputy, Owen said again. Not a question. He has, Gus said carefully, relationships in some departments. So the tip didn't come from anyone protecting us, Gus said. No. Owen processed this with the terrible efficiency of a child who had spent the day being educated in how systems actually worked versus how they were supposed to. What does Ray do? Owen said. I don't know, Gus said. And for the first time all day, Owen believed he was telling the complete truth. Danny said, Sal's still outside. He's between Maddox's guys in the entrance. He said, Danny stopped. His hand went to the back of his neck, rubbing at something that wasn't there. The gesture of a young man carrying an old tension. He said Ray needs to know that 2 of Maddox's guys moved. They're not in the vehicles anymore. Where? Gus said. He doesn't know. Lost them around the east side of the building. Gus stood up fully. His height in the small curtained bay was more apparent standing. He wasn't tall, but he was present in the particular way of someone whose physical dimensions were the least significant thing about him. Stay with them, he said to Danny. Then to Diane, do not let anyone in here that isn't wearing one of our cuts. Anyone in scrubs. Anyone... Ask them for their badge or their ID and you check the photo. You think they'd come in here? Diane said. I think two of Maddox's guys are somewhere on the east side of a building where you are, Gus said. And I'm not in the business of assuming. He went through the curtain. Diane looked at Owen. Owen looked at the curtain. Come here, Diane said. He came to the side of the bed, and she put her arm around him again, and he stood there, and outside the curtain he could hear Danny's boots on the linoleum, a deliberate back and forth, the particular rhythm of a young man standing guard outside a door. And beyond that, muffled and far, the sound of voices. Official, measured, the kind of voices that arrived with authority and expected to be received. You okay? Diane said. Yes, Owen said. She didn't ask again. She could feel against her side that he wasn't shaking, that his breathing was even, that he was running some internal process that was too quiet and too organized for a 7-year-old and had probably always been. Owen, she said. Yeah. What happened today? I know, he said. Let me say it. He was quiet. What happened today, she said, is not something that happens to people. You understand? You shouldn't have been put in that position. No 7-year-old. Her voice did something briefly, and she overrode it. I should have had a phone. I should have had the maintenance medication. I should have... Mom, Owen said. I'm not finished. You did the best you could, he said. That's what you always tell me. That's true for you, too. She didn't say anything for a moment. When did you get old? She said. Today, Owen said. And it was so precisely true that she couldn't answer it. In the hallway, Danny stopped walking. Owen heard it. The cessation of the boot rhythm was its own information. He lifted his head from his mother's shoulder. The curtain was still. Beyond it, silence, and then the low, deliberate sound of Danny's voice saying something Owen couldn't make out, and a different voice responding. A voice Owen didn't know. Diane's arm tightened around him. The curtain moved. Not Danny, a man in a dark jacket, not a uniform, not a cut. Civilian clothes, expensive, the kind that announced money without displaying it. He was in his 40s, broad across the jaw, with the physical comfort of a man who had spent many years being the largest presence in whatever room he entered and had arranged his life around maintaining that quality. His eyes went around the bay with quick professional assessment. Diane, Owen, the monitor, the IV, the exits, and then settled on Owen with a look that had something behind it Owen didn't have a name for, something that was not friendly and was pretending to be. Hey there, the man said, to Owen. His voice was easy, practiced, the voice of someone who had learned to talk to children the way you learn to talk to a witness, not for the child's benefit. You must be Owen. Owen said nothing. My name's Terrence, the man said. I'm a friend of Ray Callahan's. Owen looked at him for 1 second. Then he said, No, you're not. The man's face did something small and controlled. Why would you say that? Terrence said. Because Ray's friends know not to come in here without knocking, Owen said. And because you looked at the exits before you looked at my mom, and she's the one in the hospital bed. Diane's hand found Owen's shoulder and held it. Terrence looked at Owen with an expression that was trying to remain pleasant and was finding it increasingly difficult. Smart kid, he said. Where's Danny? Owen said. Terrence smiled. It was a bad smile, competent, practiced, genuinely cold beneath the surface tension of it. Danny's talking to some people outside, he said. He'll be back in a minute. People outside, Owen said. Or Maddox's people. Something shifted in Terrence's face. The pleasantness dissolved, not into hostility, into something quieter than that, the expression of a man who had just recalibrated. I'm going to need your mom to answer some questions for me, Terrence said, about this afternoon, about what she remembers. She doesn't remember anything, Owen said. She was unconscious. About what you told her, Terrence said, about what the men said to her. In the house, in the waiting room, and here. Diane said, You're not a deputy. Terrence looked at her. You're not wearing a uniform, she said. You didn't badge in. You pushed through a curtain in a treatment bay without identifying yourself. She held his gaze. Who do you work for? Terrence reached into his jacket. Not for a weapon. Both of them tensed, and Owen felt his mother's hand tighten on his shoulder, and Terrence saw this and slowed the motion deliberately, extracting a card, a plain card, which he set on the edge of the bed without handing it to her. "I work for a law firm, Hiccup," he said. "We have an interest in making sure the events of this afternoon are accurately documented before statements start getting made in the wrong directions." "Who hired you?" Diane said. "That's confidential at this stage." "Then get out of my room." Terrence looked at her. "Ma'am, out," Diane said. The word had iron in it. The iron of someone who had spent years being told to be quiet and had reached the absolute end of that. "Get out of my room right now, or I will hit this call button and tell every nurse on this floor that there is an unauthorized person in this bay who refused to identify himself and refused to leave." She held the call button up. Her finger was on it. "You have about 3 seconds to decide." Terrence looked at her, at Owen, at the call button. He picked the card up off the bed. He put it back in his pocket. "We'll talk later," he said, to no one specific. He went back through the curtain. Owen listened to the footsteps going down the corridor. Even unhurried, the walk of a man who had not gotten what he came for and was already adjusting to the next move. "Mom," Owen said. "I know," Diane said. "He's going to—" "I know," she said. "Owen, listen to me. Look at me." He looked at her. Her face was tired and her lungs were still working harder than they should, and the IV was still in her arm, and she had the particular pallor of someone who had been genuinely near death 6 hours ago. But her eyes were clear, and they were frightened, and she was not hiding the frightened from him, which he understood meant she needed him to be as clear-eyed as she was. "Go find Ray," she said, "right now. Tell him someone came in here and tell him what was said, and tell him that man has a card from a law firm." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Owen said. "Go." He went through the curtain. The corridor was empty. Danny was not outside the bay. Owen went fast toward the lobby door, not running. Running attracted attention, and he understood, with the operational clarity of someone who had spent a very intense afternoon observing how things went sideways, that the wrong kind of attention in the wrong place was a weapon somebody else was trying to use. He pushed through the lobby door. The waiting room was less empty than it had been. 3 people Owen didn't recognize, say, not in cuts, in civilian clothes, were seated in the rows of bolted chairs with the specific quality of people trying to look like they were waiting for someone and not succeeding entirely. Near the vending machine where Sal had been, there was nobody. Owen scanned the room. Then he saw, through the glass front doors, the parking lot. The sheriff's department units were there. 3 he could count, maybe more at the edge of his sight line. The cruiser lights were on, turning the asphalt in long, slow cycles of blue and white. There were figures in uniform near the vehicles, and figures not in uniform behind them and between them. And in the middle of the apron, between the hospital entrance and the clustered vehicles, Ray Callahan was standing, alone. He was talking to a deputy, and someone beside the deputy, who was not a deputy, and on the other side of the deputies, visible in the gaps between the official vehicles, were men in the cuts of a club Owen had never seen before, and one of those men, the one standing apart from the others, at the edge of the light, watching Ray with the specific attention of someone who had been thinking about this moment for a long time, was smiling. Owen understood, without being told, that this was Maddox. He stood at the glass doors and watched Ray standing in the parking lot, and he thought about what Gus had said. Ray Callahan doesn't let other people carry things that belong to him. He watched Maddox smile. He watched the deputy lean toward Ray with something in his hand, papers, Owen couldn't read what, and Ray's face as he took them, the precise sequence of Ray's expression as he read what was on them, calm, then still, then the flat and absolute quality of a man receiving information that closes a door he hadn't known was open. And Ray looked up from the papers, and he found Maddox's eyes in the dark, and Maddox kept smiling. And Ray Callahan, road captain, the man who had crouched to a child's eye level in a gas station parking lot without hesitation, the man who had stood in a hospital hallway for 4 hours because he'd given his word, Ray lowered the papers slowly and looked at Maddox across 20 feet of floodlit asphalt, and his face was completely, utterly, terrifyingly still. The deputy said something. Ray looked at him. And Owen, even through the glass, even at this distance, could see what happened in Ray's eyes in the moment before he answered. The closing of a very long account. The final line going in. The book coming shut. He said something to the deputy. The deputy took a step back. And then Ray Callahan turned around and walked back toward the hospital entrance. And his face as he came through the glass doors was the face of a man who had just been handed the exact thing he'd spent 2 years waiting to understand. And it was worse than he'd imagined, and he was not surprised, and he was not going to let it move him in any direction except forward. He stopped when he saw Owen. Owen said, "Someone came into my mom's room." Ray's eyes went sharp. "Man in a dark jacket," Owen said. "Said he was from a law firm. Said his name was Terrence. He wanted my mom to answer questions about what happened today." Ray's jaw tightened. "My mom threw him out," Owen said, "but he's still somewhere in the building." Ray looked back at the parking lot, at Maddox, still visible through the glass, still watching. And Owen understood, in the way he'd been understanding things all day, sideways, in pieces, with the clarity that comes from having no other option, that the man in the dark jacket and the man smiling in the parking lot were part of the same machinery. That this had all been designed. That somewhere in the construction of this afternoon, someone had known which door Ray Callahan would walk through, and had built a room behind it. "Ray," Owen said. Ray looked down at him. "Those papers," Owen said. "What were they?" Ray looked at him for a moment. "A complaint," he said. "Filed this afternoon. Against our club. Against me, specifically." "Filed by who?" Owen said. Ray looked through the glass at Maddox. "Filed by Frank Holt," he said. "Your neighbor." Owen stood very still. "Holt filed a complaint," Owen said slowly. "And Maddox is out there. And a lawyer's man came in to get my mother's statement before anyone else could." "Yes," Ray said. "They knew each other before today," Owen said. "Holt and Maddox." Ray looked at him. "That's not a coincidence either," Owen said. Ray Callahan looked at a 7-year-old boy standing in the lobby of a hospital in bare feet with wool socks bunching at the ankles, and something moved through his face that wasn't any of the things that had moved through it all day. "No," Ray said, "it's not." And outside, Maddox turned and walked back toward his vehicles, unhurried, the walk of a man who had set something in motion and was content to let it run. And the sheriff's deputies were folding the papers back into their folders. And somewhere in the building behind them, a man named Terrence was on his phone, and on Mason Street, in a house across from the tan house with the broken front door, Frank Holt was sitting in his kitchen watching the local news run the segment again. And Ray Callahan was standing in a hospital lobby with a 7-year-old who had just connected the last wire. And the whole shape of the afternoon was visible now, all of it, and it was worse than any one piece had suggested, and there was no version of the next hour that led anywhere easy. He put his hand on Owen's shoulder. "Go back to your mom," he said. "Don't open that curtain for anyone until you hear my voice." Owen said, "What are you going to do?" Ray looked through the glass at the parking lot. "The only thing I can do," he said. He walked toward the doors, and Owen stood in the lobby and watched him push through into the cold September night, and the door swung shut behind him, and through the glass Owen could see him walking. Not fast, not slow, the same deliberate, unhurried movement he'd had all day, the walk of a man who had decided a long time ago that running toward things was better than waiting for them to arrive. He walked straight toward Maddox, and Maddox watched him come, and stopped smiling. The parking lot air was cold now, in the way September air got cold in Bakersfield after the sun went all the way down. Not bitter, not winter, but with an edge to it that hadn't been there at 2 in the afternoon, a reminder that the heat had been borrowed and the bill was due. The floodlights on the hospital exterior threw hard white light across the apron and left everything beyond the first 30 feet in a darkness that had shapes in it. Ray Callahan walked into the light. Maddox was standing at the edge of it, 43 years old, heavy through the chest, with a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong after being broken and had healed into a permanent argument with itself. His cut was older than Ray's, more faded, the patches on it worn soft at the edges. He had his thumbs hooked in his belt, and he was watching Ray come with the specific attention of a man who had been running a very long play and was now watching the board settle into the configuration he'd always intended. Behind Maddox, his men were arranged in the loose way of people trying to look unorganized and failing. 6 of them, maybe 7. The dark at the edge of the lot swallowed the count. 2 of the sheriff's units had pulled out while Ray was inside. The remaining deputy, the one with Maddox's relationship, the one who'd delivered the papers, was standing near his cruiser with his arms crossed and his face doing the careful blankness of a man who had decided he was a witness and not a participant and was working hard at maintaining that fiction. Sal appeared from Ray's left. He'd come around the building's edge, out of the darkness, moving without sound in the way big men sometimes moved when they'd had years of practice at it. He fell into step beside Ray without a word, and Ray didn't look at him and didn't need to. Gus came from the right. The 3 of them stopped 10 feet from Maddox. The parking lot was very quiet. In the distance, Mason Street, the hospital's HVAC system, running its low industrial hum, the tick of a cooling engine from somewhere in the rows of parked cars. The fluorescent light above the hospital entrance buzzed once, held. Maddox looked at Ray. Ray looked at Maddox. "Ray," Maddox said. His voice was the voice of a man who'd been drinking bourbon for 20 years and had arrived at a register that was less a sound than a texture. "Long day." "Holt," Ray said. "How long?" Maddox's expression didn't change. "How long what? How long have you had him?" A pause. The pause of a man deciding whether to play the game or skip to the end. "Frank Holt's a concerned citizen," Maddox said. "He saw something troubling in his neighborhood, and he made some calls. That's what citizens do." "He called you before he called the police," Ray said. "Post went up at 3:47. First 911 call about us came in at 4:12. 25 minutes of social media work before law enforcement." He watched Maddox's face. "He was working the story before he was reporting the situation. Nobody does that without coaching." Maddox was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he smiled again. Smaller this time. More honest. "You always were too smart for your own good," he said. "Not smart," Ray said. "I just know how you work." "Then you know," Maddox said, "that the complaint's filed, that it's real, that your name is on a document in the county system right now with words attached to it that are going to take a very long time to get off." "Complaint filed by a man you own," Ray said. "Complaint filed by a registered resident of Kern County who witnessed what he believes was a kidnapping," Maddox said. "What I believe or don't believe is irrelevant. What matters is the paper." Gus said from Ray's right, "The paper falls apart the minute the boy makes a statement." Maddox looked at Gus. Something moved in his face when he looked at Gus. Not the smooth performance he'd been running with Ray, but something older and more personal, the way you look at a specific piece of unfinished business. "Gus Merritt," Maddox said. "How's the arm?" Gus's left arm. The one that had a long lateral scar from the elbow to mid-forearm that he never explained, and that nobody in the club asked about directly. Owen had noticed it in the hospital room and had not asked. Gus said nothing. "You know what your problem always was," Maddox said to Gus now, as though Ray were not standing 3 feet to Gus's left. "You were always too attached to the principle of the thing. The principle doesn't pay rent. The principle doesn't keep you out of a county cell." He paused. "The principle got you that arm." "The principle," Gus said, "is why you haven't been able to move in this county for 2 years. Maddox's smile thinned. "That changes tonight," he said. "No," Ray said. "It doesn't." Maddox looked back at him. "The complaint's filed," Ray said. "The segment ran. Holt's post is still up. Fine. All of that is real, and all of it has to be dealt with." He paused. Let Maddox have the space of a breath. "But the boy is going to make a statement. The mother is going to make a statement. The hospital staff who were present when Gus briefed the paramedics are going to make statements. And your deputy over there," Ray didn't look at the cruiser, didn't gesture, kept his eyes on Maddox, "is going to have a very difficult time explaining, in a formal proceeding, why he delivered your message before he verified the complaint." Maddox said, "You're going to make all that happen from inside a holding cell." "I'm not going inside a holding cell," Ray said. "The complaint is for disturbance of the peace and intimidation of a minor, Ray said. Misdemeanor filing. On a first complaint from a single witness with no corroborating statement, the arresting officer has discretion. He looked at the deputy by the cruiser. And I don't think your deputy wants to be standing in front of a judge explaining why he used that discretion on behalf of a man whose vehicles are parked 30 feet from him right now. The deputy by the cruiser shifted his weight, a small movement, a telling one. Maddox's jaw moved. You think you've got this worked out, he said. I think, Ray said, that you built tonight to move fast. You needed the post to run, the segment to run, the complaint to land and me to be in a holding cell before anyone had time to get the full picture in front of someone with authority. And it's been 4 hours and I'm still standing in this parking lot. So no, I don't think I've got it worked out. I think your window is closing and you know it. The silence between them had weight now, real weight, the kind that pressed on the chest. Behind Maddox, 2 of his men had moved. Not much. A repositioning, a shifting of angles. Sal tracked it without moving his head. Ray tracked it in his peripheral vision without acknowledging it. Then one of Maddox's men came forward from the dark, fast, not at Ray, at Gus. Something in his hand, not a weapon, not in the visible sense, but a phone, a screen lit and turned outward, and he stopped 3 feet from Gus and held it up and said, loud enough for Ray and Sal to hear, "You want to tell them, Gus, or should I?" The screen showed a photograph. Old. The timestamp in the corner read 3 years back. A crash scene. A highway. A motorcycle on its side, and another vehicle. And figures. And emergency personnel, and in the middle of it, in paramedic gear, Gus Merritt. "That's the McAllister Highway," the man said. "That's the night a 17-year-old kid named Reyes died at the scene while a certified EMT stood 15 feet away and didn't intervene." Gus looked at the photograph. Ray looked at Gus. Something happened in Gus's face. Something old and catastrophic and private. The sound a structure makes when the load it was built to carry finally exceeds the load it can actually hold. His jaw tightened. His breathing changed. A single departure from the controlled rhythm he'd been running all day. "That's not what happened," Ray said. To the man with the phone. Flat, factual. "That's what the photo shows," the man said. "The photo shows Gus at a scene," Ray said. "It doesn't show what happened or in what sequence. It shows a kid dead and a certified EMT on scene who didn't save him," the man said. "And it's going to look exactly that way when it runs with the segment tonight, because it's already been sent." He looked at Gus. "Channel 9 has it. With your name, with your certification number, with the club affiliation." He lowered the phone. "Tonight wasn't just about Ray. It was about making sure nobody looks at what happened in that house today and sees a hero. They're going to see a man who let a 17-year-old die and then played EMT with a woman in Bakersfield." Gus was very still. Ray said, "Gus." Gus didn't look at him. "Gus," Ray said again, quieter. The voice he'd used in the hospital hallway. The voice calibrated for someone standing at a specific edge. Gus looked at him. Ray shook his head once. The smallest possible movement. Gus looked back at the man with the phone. And when he spoke, his voice was completely flat, the flatness of someone who had made a decision about what they were and were not going to allow themselves to feel in the next 60 seconds. "The Reyes boy," Gus said, "was pronounced by the attending physician, not at the scene, at the hospital. I was not the attending paramedic on that call. I was off duty, at the scene as a civilian. I assessed him. I was with him. I held his hand while his body did what it was going to do, regardless of what I did." His voice was completely flat. "I lapsed my certification 4 months later because I could not stop seeing his face every time I went to work. That's in the record. All of it. The photo doesn't change the record." The man with the phone looked less certain than he had. "Send it," Gus said. "Send it tonight. Send it to every channel, and then stand in front of a camera yourself and explain why you sent a 3-year-old photograph of an off-duty EMT at a crash scene to a news station as evidence of misconduct." He paused. "See how that goes." The man looked at Maddox. Maddox looked at Gus. Something shifted. Not a retreat. Maddox didn't retreat. didn't have the mechanism for it. Ray knew this better than anyone. But a shift, a recalculation, the chess player recognizing that a piece he'd thought was exposed was more complicated than it looked. "Okay," Maddox said, quietly, almost to himself. He took a step forward. Ray's body changed in a way that wasn't visible exactly, but that every man in the parking lot registered. A settling, a centering, weight dropping into the hips in the way of someone who had done this before and knew the geometry. "You're not going to walk away from tonight," Maddox said, just to Ray. The performance gone. The smooth machinery of the last hour stripped back to what was underneath it. What was underneath it was old and personal and had nothing to do with counties or complaints or news segments. The complaint, the segment, the photo. None of that matters. What matters is that you're here, on my ground, with 4 men, and I've got 7. He stopped 2 feet from Ray, close enough that his voice dropped to something that didn't carry past the 2 of them. "And your deputy's going to his car." Ray didn't look at the cruiser. He looked at Maddox. "I know what you did to Carver," Ray said. Maddox was still. "I know the highway wasn't an accident," Ray said. "I've known for 18 months. I've been building the case, not with lawyers, not with complaints." He paused. "With evidence. The kind that doesn't go away when a deputy drives away." Maddox said nothing. "The photograph that man had on his phone," Ray said. "The one from the McAllister Highway. You know what's interesting about that photograph? Nobody outside the incident report database had access to that image. It was never published. It was evidence in a closed review." Maddox's jaw. "Someone with database access sent it," Ray said. "Tonight, to your man. And there are only 3 categories of people with access to that database." He watched Maddox's face. Paramedics, reviewing physicians, and Sheriff's Department personnel with a login to the county incident system. The parking lot was completely silent except for the HVAC hum and the distant sound of the highway. "That's a chain," Ray said, "from the incident database to your man's phone to Channel 9. And chains have links, and links have names, and names have paper attached to them." He held Maddox's gaze. "You built tonight to close something. So did I, and I've had longer." For 4 seconds, nothing moved. Then Maddox hit him. It wasn't a sucker punch. It was too direct for that, too honest in its way, the swing of a man who was done with language. It caught Ray on the left cheekbone, a hard straight shot with the weight of 2 years of patience behind it. And Ray's head went back and he stepped back with it. 1 foot, 2, absorbing the movement instead of fighting it. Everything happened at once. Sal moved left, into the man who'd had the phone. Not a punch, a grip, 2 hands catching the man's jacket and turning his momentum into the side of a parked car with a sound like a bag of sand hitting concrete. The man bounced off the door and went to one knee, and Sal stood over him with the deliberate stillness of someone who had decided that was sufficient and would not be moved from that decision. Gus took the man to his right, a bigger man, someone who'd been waiting, who came in fast and low, and absorbed the tackle by going with it instead of against it, turning it into a controlled fall that ended with Gus on top and the man's arm in a lock that was medical in its precision, the grip of someone who knew exactly where tendons attached to bone and what angle made them reconsider. Danny? Owen hadn't seen Danny come out, but he was there, at the edge of the light, having come from somewhere, and he had his hands up and was talking, fast and low, to 2 of Maddox's men who'd moved to flank Gus's position, talking them back a step with the quality of a young man who'd learned the difference between a fight you won and a fight that was useful. Ray straightened up. His left cheek was going to show that punch for a week. He could feel it already in the deep tissue, the pre-bruise heat of something that had landed squarely. He brought his hand up and touched it once, assessing, then lowered the hand. He looked at Maddox. Maddox was breathing harder. The punch had cost him too. Not physically, but in terms of the thing he'd been holding together all evening. The strategy, the patience, the long game. He'd thrown it away in a moment, and they both knew it. "Feel better," Ray said. Maddox's hands were still up, fists, the position of a man deciding whether the next move was worth what it cost. "You've got nothing," Maddox said. "The chain you're talking about. You can't prove it. You don't have names. You've got a theory." "I've got a theory and 18 months of documentation," Ray said. "And I've got tonight. Tonight you put 7 men in a hospital parking lot, and sent a man into a patient's room to intimidate a woman who was admitted 4 hours ago. His voice was completely steady. That's not a theory. That's on camera. The hospital entrance has cameras. The corridor has cameras. And the woman in that room is going to describe your man Terrence to a sketch artist with a very good memory because she's that kind of woman. Maddox looked at him. And her son, Ray said, is 7 years old, and he could identify Terrence in a lineup right now without hesitation because he's that kind of kid. Something went through Maddox's face. Not fear. Maddox didn't run on fear, which was part of what made him dangerous. Something more like the recognition of a very specific error. The recognition of which variables he'd failed to account for. You used Holt, Ray said, and Holt is going to have to sit in front of someone official and explain his relationship with you. And that deputy over there, the cruiser was gone, Ray noticed, had left at some point in the last 90 seconds, is going to have to explain his. And the chain from the incident database is going to have to be explained by whoever pulls those access logs. He stopped. Let it land. You didn't account for the kid. The kid, Maddox said. 7 years old, Ray said, ran barefoot through burning asphalt to find help. Identified when he was being lied to. Connected Holt and you before I did. He looked at Maddox. You built tonight around what you thought this afternoon was. You thought it was a PR problem and an opportunity. You didn't account for what it actually was. And what was it? Maddox said. Ray looked at him for a moment. A kid who needed help, he said. That's all it ever was. Maddox's fists were still up. Behind him, his men were in various states of the aftermath of a fight that had happened fast and gone wrong for them. The man Sal had put against the car was sitting on the asphalt, looking at his hands. The man Gus had locked was standing with his arm at a careful angle. Danny's two were 3 feet further back than they'd started and staying there. Maddox looked at the situation. He was a man who could do math. Whatever else he was, he could do math. This isn't over, he said. It's not, Ray agreed. The complaint will be addressed, Ray said. Legally, properly, with the statements of everyone who was there today. He paused. Including Frank Holtz, once someone with a subpoena sits across from him and asks him when he first contacted you. Maddox said nothing. Go home, Ray said. It wasn't a threat. It was almost tired. The tone of a man who had been standing in a parking lot for a long time and was ready to be done with the part of the evening that was about Maddox. Maddox looked at him, at Gus, at Sal, at Danny, at his own men and the positions they were in. He lowered his fists. He took a step back. He turned and walked to his vehicle without looking back, and his men collected themselves and followed, and the sound of their engines starting, 4 of them, one after another, a ragged percussion in the cold air, was the sound of something not finished but paused. The difference between an ending and a suspension that both parties understood wasn't permanent. Ray watched the last set of taillights clear the parking lot exit. He stood there for a moment in the empty apron with Gus and Sal and Danny, and the hospital HVAC ran its hum, and the fluorescent entrance light buzzed, and the parking lot settled into the quiet of a place that had held a large amount of tension and was now doing the slow work of releasing it. Sal said, "He'll be back." "Yes," Ray said. The chain is real," Ray said. "What I told him was real. It'll take time." "How much time?" Danny said. "More than tonight," Ray said. "Less than a year." He touched his cheekbone again, left it alone. "Get the bikes. We need to get back inside." They moved. Ray stayed where he was for a moment longer. The cold air moved against the left side of his face, the bruised side, and it was the best thing he'd felt in the last several hours. Simple and physical and entirely honest in a way that the last 6 hours had mostly not been. He took one slow breath in, let it out, watched it fog in the cooling air. Then he went back inside. The lobby was quiet. The 3 men who'd been sitting in the chairs when Owen had come through, not waiting for patients, Owen had been right about that, were gone. The nurse's station had a different face on it, a night shift face, someone who hadn't been here for the afternoon and didn't carry the afternoon's weight. Ray went through the corridor door and down the hall to Diane's bay. He pushed the curtain back. Owen was sitting on the edge of the visitor chair with his bare feet flat on the floor and his hands folded between his knees. And he looked up when the curtain moved and something happened in his face that was very fast and very controlled, but Ray caught it. The release of something the boy had been holding in his chest for however long he'd been sitting here. Not relief exactly. Something more like the recognition that the thing he'd been waiting to know about had resolved in a direction he could live with. Diane was watching Ray from the bed. Her eyes went to his cheekbone. She said nothing about it. "Maddox," she said. "Gone," Ray said. "For tonight." "And the complaint?" "Still real," Ray said. "Still has to be dealt with. But it can be dealt with. I've got people." Diane looked at him for a moment, the look of a woman running a fast inventory of what she was being told and what was underneath it. "The man who came in here," she said. "Terrence." "Working on it," Ray said. "The cameras in the corridor will have him. I need you to be willing to give a statement." "I'll give 10 statements," Diane said. "I'll give them in triplicate." "One is enough." Owen said, "What happens now?" Ray looked at him. The boy was tired, really tired, bone tired, the kind that comes from running on adrenaline for so long that when it starts to metabolize, the exhaustion underneath is enormous. But his eyes were clear. They'd been clear all day. Ray had a feeling they were always clear, that this was structural, not circumstantial. "Now," Ray said, "your mom finishes getting treated. She gets discharged when the doctor says she can. We get you both home." "And then," Owen said. "And then you sleep," Ray said. "And tomorrow there's a lot of work to do, but that's tomorrow." Owen looked at him. "What about Holt?" Owen said. Ray paused. "Frank Holt is going to have to answer for some things," Ray said carefully. "He knew Maddox," Owen said, "before today. He was ready when you showed up. He had the number to call." "Yes. He was waiting for a reason," Owen said. "Or Maddox was waiting for a reason and Holt was the reason." He looked at Ray. "Either way, he helped them try to hurt you, for helping my mom." Ray was quiet. "That's not okay," Owen said. "Not heat in it. Not the way a child says something they want an adult to act on. The flat, precise delivery of someone naming a fact." "No," Ray said. "It's not." "Are you going to do something about it?" Owen said. "Yes," Ray said. "The right way." "What's the right way?" "Slower than you want," Ray said, "and less satisfying in the moment, but more permanent." Owen considered this. "Okay," he said. Diane made a sound from the bed. Not a word. A sound, the particular sound of a person who has been listening to a conversation and has arrived somewhere the conversation didn't take them. Both Ray and Owen looked at her. She was looking at Ray. Something in her expression had shifted from the earlier version, from the controlled assessment of a woman gathering information to something that had let more of itself show, the way a face does when it's been through enough that performance stops being available as an option. "My ex-husband," she said. "Owen's father. He left when Owen was 2. I haven't had—" She stopped, chose. "I haven't had people in my corner for a long time." Ray didn't say anything. "It's a strange thing," she said, "to have it happen like this." "Yeah," Ray said, "to owe it to strangers." "You don't owe us anything," Ray said. "I know that's what you'd say," she said. "I'm saying it's strange, not bad strange. Just—" She looked at Owen, at her son sitting in the chair with 2 big wool socks and clear eyes and the face of a boy who had done something enormous today and hadn't fully arrived at the understanding of it yet. "Strange." Owen said, "Mom." "Yeah, baby." "I'm hungry." And something cracked open in the room. Not laughter exactly, but the thing underneath laughter. The release of something that had been held at pressure for too many hours. And Diane put her hand over her mouth and her shoulders moved. And even Ray's face did something in the vicinity of it. And Gus, who had come back through the curtain at some point during the conversation and was standing quiet at its edge, said, "There's a vending machine." "I've had the coffee," Owen said. "It was terrible." "The chips are worse," Gus said, "but they're food in a technical sense." Owen stood up. He looked at Ray. "Can I go with him?" Owen said. Ray looked at Gus. Gus tilted his head toward the corridor. The gesture of a man who had been functioning as a guardian all afternoon without being asked and wasn't going to stop because the immediate crisis had passed. Owen went to the curtain and then stopped and looked back at Ray. "Your face," Owen said. Ray touched the cheekbone. "It's fine." "It's going to be very purple," Owen said. "I know." "It was Maddox." "Yes." Owen looked at him for a moment with those clear, clear eyes. "Good," he said. "At least it was someone who deserved to." He went through the curtain. Ray stood in the bay and listened to the sound of the boys' footsteps going down the corridor, and Gus's footsteps beside them. And Diane was watching him from the bed with the oxygen monitor still on her finger and the IV line still running and the sound of her breathing still carrying a little more effort than it should, but holding, but there. "He said good," Diane said. "He did," Ray said. "That worry you?" Ray thought about it. The honest version. "No," he said. "He said it because it meant I came back, not because he wanted me to get hit." Diane looked at him. "You're good with kids," she said. "I don't know many kids," Ray said. "You're good with this one." Ray looked at the curtain where Owen had gone through. "He's not hard to be good with," Ray said. "He doesn't need you to manage him. He just needs you to tell him the truth and then let him be where he is with it." "That's all any of us need," Diane said. "Most adults forgot how to take it," Ray said. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Ray," she said. He looked at her. "The front door," she said. "At the house. You told Owen you'd fix it." "I did," Ray said. "The lock is broken. You shouldn't be in that house with a broken—" "I know," she said. I'm noting that you said it, that you meant it." "I meant it," Ray said. She nodded slowly, like she was filing something, like she was putting something in a drawer she intended to return to. Outside, down the corridor, there was a sound from the vending machine, a mechanical thump, the sound of something dispensing, and then Owen's voice saying something to Gus that Ray couldn't make out, and Gus's response, low and even, and then a silence that was the comfortable kind. Ray sat down in the visitor chair. He put his forearms on his knees in the posture that was, he realized, the same posture Gus used. Forward, compact, ready. He looked at the floor. "The Varka Kings," Diane said. "Maddox, the complaint. All of it." "Will be handled," Ray said. "I need to understand what that means for us," she said. "For Owen. If by being in our house today you people are now connected to us in ways that put him at risk." "That's a fair concern," Ray said. "And I'm not going to tell you it's not a risk. Being connected to us carries weight. It always does." Diane was quiet. "But here's what's also true," Ray said. "Before tonight, Maddox didn't know your name. He didn't know Owen's name. He knows them now. That's not because we came to your house. That's because Holt decided to use your afternoon as a weapon, and Holt would have done that regardless." He paused. "The risk isn't new. It's just visible now. And visible risk you can prepare for. And you'll help us prepare," she said. Not a question, the tone of someone reading the shape of things. "Yes," Ray said. She held his gaze. "Why?" she said. He opened his mouth. And then his phone went off. He looked at the screen. It was a number he knew. A number he hadn't expected to see tonight. A number attached to a name that brought with it a specific history, a specific weight. The particular gravity of someone who had information Ray had been trying to get hold of for a very long time. He looked at it for 1 second. He looked up at Diane. "I have to take this," he said. He went through the curtain. In the corridor, he answered the call on the second ring and said nothing, waiting. The voice on the other end was female, clipped, careful in the way of someone calling from a location where being overheard was a real consideration. She said, "The access logs you need, the incident database, the chain from the McAllister photograph to Maddox's man." Ray said, "Who is this?" She said, "Someone who's been inside the same department for 6 years and is done being inside it." Ray said, "How do I know this is real?" She said, "Because I was in the cruiser tonight, and I drove away because I was told to drive away. And I'm calling you from a gas station 2 miles from the hospital because I'm done being told." Ray stood in the corridor. The fluorescent light ran its long hum above him. "What do you have?" he said. She said, "Everything." And in the bay behind the curtain, Diane Barrett lay in a hospital bed and listened to the silence of a corridor where a man was standing with a phone, and whatever he was hearing was either the thing that closed the case or the thing that opened something worse, and she would not know which until he came back through the curtain. And at the vending machine, Owen Barrett was eating chips that were, as advertised, terrible, and Gus Merritt was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. And Owen, who had been watching him for 2 minutes, said, "The ring." Gus looked at him. "You keep turning it," Owen said. "Whose was it?" Gus looked at the ring. Owen waited. "My son's," Gus said. Owen said nothing. "He was 4, Gus said. It was his. It was a toy ring from a machine, the kind you get for $0.25. He turned it once. He gave it to me. Said I had to wear it so I'd remember who to come home to." He stopped turning it. "I didn't come home in time. Accident. Not mine. A drunk driver in a crosswalk on a Tuesday morning." He looked at the wall across from him. "He was 4. Owen stood against the vending machine and looked at this man on the floor, this man with the scar on his neck, and the lapsed certification, and the carefully parceled information, and the quarter machine ring on his finger, and he understood that the story of how Gus Merritt ended up on the back of a motorcycle with Ray Callahan's hand extended was not a story about a bad choice or a wrong turn. It was a story about a man who had lost everything that gave his hands a reason to be careful, and had spent 3 years in the wreckage of that until someone offered him a reason to be careful again. "Is that why?" Owen said. Gus looked at him. "Is that why you came?" Owen said. "When I asked." Gus was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that was working something through. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe it was." Owen slid down the side of the vending machine and sat on the floor beside him. They sat there in the corridor, the boy and the man, with the terrible chips and the quarter machine ring and the hum of the hospital around them, and neither of them said anything else, and neither of them needed to. Down the corridor, Ray Callahan stood with his phone and listened to a woman describe the shape of a chain that went from a dead boy on a highway to a photograph on a phone to a parking lot tonight, and the shape of it was exactly what he'd suspected and worse than he'd hoped. And the woman's voice was steady and clipped, and she was clearly terrified and clearly done being terrified, and Ray listened to every word without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Can you get to a safe location?" She said, "I'm already moving." He said, There's a number I'm going to give you. A lawyer. Not mine. Independent. Call her tonight." She said, "I need to know you're going to use what I'm giving you." He said, "I'm going to use all of it." She said, "Maddox has more than one deputy." Ray said, "I know." She said, "He has a DA contact." Ray said, "Tell me the name." She told him. And in the parking lot, 2 miles away, a car pulled out of a gas station and turned onto the highway, heading north, and its lights disappeared into the dark of the California night. And it carried the last piece of the chain in the handbag of a woman who had been waiting 6 years for a reason to stop carrying it alone. And Ray Callahan stood in a hospital corridor in Bakersfield with the phone still warm in his hand and the bruise building on his cheekbone and the full weight of what he'd just been given settling across his shoulders like something he'd been walking toward for a very long time. He looked at the curtain of Diane's bay. He looked down the corridor at the corner where Owen and Gus were sitting on the floor. He thought about a 7-year-old boy stepping in front of a motorcycle and saying 3 words. He put his phone in his pocket. He walked back to the curtain and pushed through it, and Diane looked up at him, and his face told her something before he said a word. And what it told her was, "It's real, all of it, and it's going to take time, and we're going to do it. And there is a version of the other side of this that exists, and I can see it from here." He sat down in the visitor chair. Diane looked at him. "Tell me," she said. He told her, and outside, through the hospital glass, the California night was cold and very dark, and the highway ran its long pale line toward everything that was coming. And somewhere on that highway a woman drove with 6 years of evidence in her bag. And in a parking lot 2 miles back, the last of Maddox's taillights had long since gone. And on Mason Street, a man named Frank Holt was sitting in his kitchen in the dark, not watching the television anymore, feeling, for the first time since 3:47 that afternoon, Something he couldn't quite name, but that lived in the same neighborhood as the understanding that he had been used, and that the thing he'd been used for was not finished, and that his name was on a document in the county system with words attached to it that were going to take a very long time to address, just like Maddox had promised Ray, except the document was the complaint, and the name on it was Holt's, and the words attached were his, and the man who told him what to write had a very different relationship to consequences than Frank Holt had understood when he picked up the phone. In the hospital bay, Ray Callahan finished talking. Diane Barrett was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" And Ray looked at her. This woman who had been on a bedroom floor 4 hours ago and was now sitting up in a hospital bed asking what she could do. And the answer was simple and specific, and would change the shape of the next several months for everyone in the building and everyone connected to them. He said it, and she said, "Then we start tomorrow." And Owen, down the corridor, heard nothing of this, but felt something, the particular atmospheric change of a situation that has been in freefall finding, finally, something to land on. He ate another chip. It was still terrible. He ate it anyway. The discharge papers came through at 11:47. A night shift doctor, young, tired, with the particular efficiency of someone running on their 4th consecutive shift and had long since burned through the social energy that daylight hours required, came through the curtain, checked Diane's oxygen saturation one more time, listened to her lungs with a stethoscope he warmed against his palm. First, and signed the paperwork without ceremony. He gave her a prescription for the maintenance inhaler, a follow-up appointment card, and a list of warning signs printed on yellow paper that she folded and put in her jacket pocket without reading because she already knew all of them. He looked at Ray, sitting in the visitor chair. He looked at the bruise on Ray's cheekbone, which had gone from red to the deep preliminary purple that meant the next 3 days were going to be colorful. He said, "You want something for that?" Ray said no. The doctor left. Sal appeared at the curtain with a clean car, a sedan, dark blue, borrowed from someone whose name Ray didn't offer and Diane didn't ask. And Owen, who had been asleep in the corridor chair for 40 minutes with his head against Gus's shoulder, woke up the way children wake when they've been running on adrenaline and have finally spent it all. Completely, instantaneously, with no transition between unconscious and present, sitting up with his eyes already clear and his hands already steady. "We going?" he said. "We're going," Ray said. They went. The drive back to Mason Street took 11 minutes. Diane sat in the front seat of the sedan with Owen pressed against her side in the back, and Sal drove with the quiet competence of a man who'd been navigating other people's complicated situations for long enough that the navigation had become its own kind of ease. Gus rode in the front passenger seat and said nothing, and the absence of his speaking was not emptiness, but the particular density of someone thinking through something with great care. Ray rode one of the bikes. The night air on the cheekbone was honest in a way the hospital had not been. Mason Street at midnight was the version of itself it always was when the daytime performance was over. Quiet, the porches empty, the curtains still, the ambient hum of window units and the distant sound of the highway a block over. The streetlight at the far end was doing its orange thing, sodium vapor, the color that made everything look like a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. Sal pulled in front of the tan house. Ray pulled the bike to the curb behind him. The front door was still broken. The lock had sheared when Gus had tried it too fast coming through the first time, back in the afternoon when every second had been a negotiation with what was happening to Diane's lungs. Ray had noticed it when they left for the hospital and had said he'd fix it. And he'd meant it, and here it was. He looked at it. "Tonight," Owen said from the sidewalk. Ray looked at him. "You said you'd fix the door," Owen said. "I want it fixed tonight, before we go in." Diane looked at her son. Something moved through her face. "Owen, it should be fixed," Owen said. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at the door, at the broken lock, at the place where the afternoon had started in a way they would all spend a long time understanding. "It should be fixed before we go in." Ray looked at the door. He looked at Danny, who had appeared from somewhere, had ridden with Tommy on a second bike, both of them pulling up to the curb now, engines cutting. And Danny was already moving to the saddlebag on his machine, because Danny had ridden with Ray long enough to know that Ray meant what he said about things like doors, and had packed accordingly. 20 minutes later, the lock was replaced. Not a temporary fix. A proper deadbolt, the kind that required a key and resisted the kind of force that had broken the old one. Danny worked fast and without comment, his hands knowing the job, and Tommy held the light from his phone at the angle that was needed without being asked, and when it was done, Danny tested it twice, handed Diane the 2 keys that came with it, and stepped back. Diane held the keys. She looked at the door. She unlocked it and opened it and stood in the threshold for a moment, looking into the dark interior of the house where this had all begun, and then she stepped inside and turned on the light. They came in. The house was exactly as they'd left it. The glass of water still on the counter, the rescue inhaler still on the bedroom floor where the paramedic had set it down, the indentation in the carpet where Diane had been, and where a body leaves a record of the weight it carried. Owen went to the bedroom doorway and looked at the inhaler and then came back without picking it up. Sal went to the kitchen. He was in there for a few minutes, and the sound of a kettle, and then the sound of the refrigerator, and then, eventually, the smell of coffee. They'd found a half-full bag in the cabinet, old but not finished, and Sal made coffee the way he did everything, completely and without announcement. Ray sat on the couch. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor and let himself be still for the first time since the afternoon. Owen sat beside him, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be there. The same distance Ray had maintained in the hospital waiting room, Ray noticed. The boy had paid attention to everything. "Are you going to tell me what happened?" Owen said. Not a demand, just a question with a quiet expectation of honesty attached to it. "The woman who called me," Ray said, "at the hospital. She's a deputy. She's been watching Maddox's relationship with the department for 2 years. She had the access logs, the record of who pulled that photograph from the incident database and when." He paused. "She's going to a federal contact, not county, federal." "Because the county has Maddox's people in it," Owen said. "Some of them," Ray said. "Not all, but enough that county level isn't clean." "And Holt," Owen said. "Holt filed the complaint at Maddox's direction," Ray said. "That's going to come out. When it does, the complaint folds. The question is whether Holt had any prior relationship with Maddox that was criminal in nature, or whether he was just a frightened man who made a very bad choice because someone he trusted told him what to do." "Which is it?" Owen said. Ray was quiet for a moment. "I think he was frightened," he said. "I think he looked out his window and saw things that scared him, and someone handed him a framework that made the fear feel like righteousness, and he ran with it without looking at where he was running to." He paused. "That doesn't excuse what he did, but it's probably the truth of it." Owen was quiet for a moment. "He's going to have to live across the street from us," Owen said. "Yes," Ray said. "That's going to be uncomfortable." "Yes," Ray said. "It is." Owen looked at the carpet, at the indentation near the bedroom door where his mother had been. "She could have died," he said. Not with drama, with the flat precision of someone who had understood this fully since the moment he'd found her on the floor and hadn't allowed himself to rest it down all day. "She could have," Ray said. "If you hadn't come. If you hadn't run," Ray said. "That's the actual sequence." Owen looked at him. "You ran first," Ray said. "You ran to houses that didn't help you, and then you ran to us, and you put yourself in front of a motorcycle because you didn't have any other options, and you weren't going to stand still. That's the sequence. What we did was answer. Answering is easier than asking." Owen held his gaze. "Is it?" Owen said. Ray looked at him, the full level look he'd been giving the boy all day, the look that didn't manage or soften. "No," he said. "Not always. But tonight it was. Because you asked right." Sal came out of the kitchen with coffee and the 2 cups the cabinet had offered, a mug with a faded logo on it and a plain one, and set them on the low table in front of Ray and Owen without comment, then went back for whatever he was doing in there. The sound of the kettle again. He was making do. Gus came in from outside. He'd been on the porch, standing in the cold air with a cigarette that had been going for a while. The ember reduced to almost nothing. He came through the door and closed it, the new lock catching cleanly, the mechanism working the way it was supposed to, and stood in the small living room for a moment before going to sit in the chair opposite the couch. He looked at Owen. Owen looked at him. "You slept," Gus said. "A little, Owen said. Good. You didn't. No. Owen picked up one of the coffees. He held the mug with both hands the way he'd held the vending machine cup in the hospital, for the warmth as much as anything else. Gus, he said. Gus looked at him. The Pharmaceutical Assistance Program, Owen said. For my mom's maintenance inhaler. You said you'd get the information. Gus reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He leaned forward and set it on the coffee table. Already wrote it down, he said, at the hospital, while you were asleep. Owen looked at the paper. He looked at Gus. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Something passed between them that was more specific than thanks. The acknowledgement between two people who had understood each other in a corridor at midnight on the worst night of one of their lives, and who would carry that understanding somewhere permanent. Diane came out of the bedroom. She'd changed out of the hospital discharge clothes into her own things. The quiet dignity of a woman reestablishing herself in her own space, reclaiming the texture of ordinary life after the profound disruption of the day. She'd washed her face and her hair was down, and she looked tired in the way of someone who had been genuinely frightened and was on the other side of it, which was its own specific kind of exhaustion. She looked at the room, at Ray on the couch with the purple bruise building on his face and the coffee he hadn't touched yet, at Gus in the chair with the burnt-down cigarette smell and the folded hands, at Owen between them with the two big wool socks and both hands around the mug, at Danny and Tommy visible through the kitchen doorway, sitting at the counter with their own coffees that Sal had produced from somewhere. At Sal himself, standing near the window with his arms crossed in the posture he seemed to have been born into, watching the street with the quiet vigilance of a man who would not stop watching until he had decided for himself that there was nothing left to watch for. All of you are in my living room, she said. Nobody answered this. At midnight, she said. 12:14, Danny said from the kitchen. Diane looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of someone who immediately understood that the correction had not been requested and was now committed to it nonetheless. Thank you, Danny, she said. Yeah, he said. Sorry. Diane went to the kitchen and looked at the counter and then looked at Sal, who had apparently located a box of crackers and some peanut butter that had been in the cabinet and had constructed from these ingredients a plate of something that was nutritionally sufficient, if not elegant. Eat something, Sal said. To the room. Diane looked at the plate. She took a cracker. She ate it, standing at the counter, and then she took another one. And the kitchen was warm from the kettle and the coffee and the bodies in it, and outside the window, Mason Street was quiet and cold and dark, and entirely uninformed about what had happened in this house today and in this kitchen tonight. And Diane ate crackers with peanut butter at 12:14 in the morning, surrounded by people she had not known existed at 2 o'clock that afternoon. And the strangeness of this was absolute, and she let herself feel the strangeness of it without trying to resolve it. Ray came into the kitchen doorway. We'll leave when you're ready, he said. Tonight or now? Whenever. Diane looked at him. The door is fixed, she said. Yes. And someone will be outside. It wasn't a question. She'd already understood this about them, that the infrastructure of their presence was already deployed without announcement. Tommy's staying, Ray said. On the street. You won't see him, but he'll be there. For how long? Diane said. Until it's not necessary, Ray said. We'll know when that is. Diane looked at him for a moment. The woman who called you, she said. The deputy, she's safe? She's moving, Ray said. She'll be somewhere safe by morning. And the federal contact is already aware, Ray said. I called while Danny was doing the door. Diane processed this. The speed of it, the quiet efficiency of a group of people who had decades of experience with situations that required fast movement in the dark. How long before Maddox is actually... She stopped, chose her word. Contained. Ray said, months. Maybe longer. Federal processes are slow. And between now and then. Between now and then, Ray said, we're careful. And you have my number. She held his gaze. A card, she said. You were going to give me a card. He reached into his jacket and produced it. Plain white, handwritten number, the same card he'd described in the hospital. He set it on the counter. She looked at it. That's a lot of trust, she said, on both sides. It is, he said. She picked up the card. She put it in her pocket. Okay, she said. She went back to the living room. Ray followed. Owen had finished the coffee and was listing slightly against the couch cushion. Not asleep, but in that threshold state that children enter when the body has decided the emergency is over and is beginning to file the paperwork. Diane sat beside him. He leaned into her without waking fully, the automatic movement of someone for whom this particular gravity was the oldest and most reliable thing in the world. Gus stood up from the chair. "We should go," he said. To Ray. Ray looked at Diane, a question. "Go," she said. "We're all right." Ray looked at Owen, the boy's head against his mother's shoulder. The eyes closed now, the tension finally gone from his face, replaced by the simple unconscious trust of a child who has been frightened for a very long time and has found, at last, a reason to stop. Ray looked at him for a long moment. He reached over and straightened the wool sock that had bunched entirely off Owen's heel while he was sleeping. A small thing. Entirely unnecessary. The kind of thing you did when your hands needed to do something and words were not available. He stood up. Gus was already at the door. Sal was moving. Danny and Tommy came out of the kitchen, Danny with his jacket zipped, Tommy with his keys. Ray stopped in the doorway. "Diane," he said. She looked up at him over Owen's head. "He was the real thing today," Ray said, "what he did. When you're explaining this to him later, when he's old enough for the full version, don't let it get reduced to a story about us. We were here because he went looking. That matters more than what we did after." Diane held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I know who he is." "Good," Ray said. He went through the door. The night air on the porch was cold and real and smelled like September and asphalt and the distant ghost of someone's outdoor barbecue from earlier in the week, charcoal and thyme. Ray stood on the front step and looked at Mason Street and breathed it in through his nose and let it out slow. Gus came to stand beside him. They stood there for a moment. "The deputy's access logs," Gus said. "The chain. You really have enough?" "We'll have enough," Ray said. "When she gets where she's going, when the federal contact takes the meeting." He paused. "Months." "You said months to Diane." "It's true." Gus was quiet for a moment. "Carver," he said. Ray didn't move. "Carver's going to know," Gus said. "When this goes federal, it's going to come out that the McAllister Highway wasn't an accident. And Carver—" "I know," Ray said. "He's been in that chair for 2 years thinking it was," Gus said. "Thinking it was just bad luck, bad road, wrong night." His voice was level in the way of someone holding something at a very careful distance. "Finding out it was Maddox is going to—" "I know," Ray said again, quieter. Gus turned the ring on his finger. "Once." "He's going to want to do something about it," Gus said. "He's in a wheelchair," Ray said. "That's not going to matter to him," Gus said. "You know that." Ray looked at the street. At the street light at the far end with its sodium vapor orange. At the curtained windows of the houses on either side of the tan house. At the dark windows of Frank Holt's house across the street, closed and quiet and containing, somewhere inside it, a man who was going to wake up tomorrow into the specific morning after knowledge of someone who had made a serious error and was beginning to understand the shape of it. "I'll talk to Carver," Ray said. "Before it breaks." "When?" "Tomorrow," Ray said. "Morning." He paused. "I should have talked to him 6 months ago." "You didn't have enough then." "No," Ray said. I didn't." He looked at the street. "Now I do." Gus said nothing. He understood what that cost. The 6 months of building the case carefully and correctly while Carver sat in the chair not knowing, while the distance between what was true and what Carver had been allowed to believe grew longer and more difficult to close. Ray had made the call he'd thought was right, and it had been the right call. And it was going to be one of the hardest conversations of his life. Sal came off the porch and went to the bikes. Danny and Tommy followed. Gus looked at the door, at the new deadbolt, the clean mechanism, the fixed thing in the fixed place. "You're good at that," he said. Ray glanced at the door. "At what?" "Fixing the door," Gus said. "Knowing that's the thing that needs fixing." Ray looked at the door, then at Gus. The lock was broken, he said. Yeah, Gus said. I know. He stepped off the porch. That's what I mean. Ray looked at the door for one more moment. Then he followed Gus to the bikes. The engines started one by one. Not all at once. Sequential, careful, the consideration of men who knew they were on a residential street at 12:30 in the morning. The sound of them, even moderated, was the most honest thing Mason Street had heard all day. No performance in it, no story, just the machinery of men heading somewhere and the particular music that machinery made. Tommy stayed. He pulled his bike to the far end of the block, out of the direct sightline of the house, and killed his engine and sat with his helmet off and his eyes on the street. He would be there until morning. He was 25 years old, and he had a yellowing bruise on his jaw, and he would not be asked twice. Ray pulled out last. He went slow down Mason Street, past the Puente house, past the house with the man who'd said he'd call someone, past Frank Holt's dark windows, past the streetlight at the end of the block, and then he accelerated onto the 4-lane and the hospital and the parking lot, and Maddox and the deputy and the woman driving north with the access logs fell back into the distance behind him. He rode. The highway at this hour was almost empty. A semi some distance ahead, running its lights in the dark. A pickup coming the other direction. The long, pale road and the cold air, and the bruise on his cheekbone and the weight of what had been said and not done today settling across him the way weight settled after a long ride. Not crushing, but present. A useful pressure. He thought about Owen Barrett stepping in front of his motorcycle with bare feet and 3 words. He thought about Carver in the chair. He thought about the woman on the highway with the access logs. He thought about Gus on the hospital floor with the quarter machine ring and a boy sitting down beside him. He thought about a bedroom floor and a rescue inhaler that was nearly empty, but not quite. He rode for 40 minutes before he pulled into the parking lot of a diner at the edge of the county, the kind of diner that had been here since before the highway was rerouted, and had survived the rerouting and the 30 years after it by virtue of being exactly what it was at every hour of the day or night. Warm, lit, with coffee that was real coffee and food that made no claims. Gus and Sal were already there. Danny's bike in the row beside theirs. Ray killed his engine, sat on the bike for a moment in the quiet of the parking lot, and looked at the diner's lit windows, the amber light inside, the shape of his people visible through the glass. Gus with his forearms on the table, Sal with his arms crossed, Danny's hands around a mug. He went in. The bell above the door announced him. The smell of coffee and old griddle and warm air hit him like the most straightforward thing that had happened all day. He slid into the booth. A woman, 50s, short hair, the particular composure of someone who had worked nights for long enough that nothing surprised her at this hour, came and put a cup in front of him without asking and filled it from the pot she was already carrying and went away without a word. It was the most efficient act of hospitality Ray had experienced in recent memory. He wrapped both hands around the cup. The 4 of them sat in the amber light of the diner at 12:47 in the morning, and the coffee was hot and real, and the booth was warm. And outside the highway ran its quiet line through the dark, and there was nothing that needed to be said immediately, so nobody said anything. After a while, Danny said, "Tommy okay out there?" "Tommy's fine," Sal said. "He's been out there since the hospital." "He knows how to stand watch," Sal said. "He's been doing it since he was 19. A pause. "He's fine." Danny nodded, looked at his coffee. "The bruise," Danny said. To Ray. "Maddox?" "Yes," Ray said. "He get anything else in?" "No." Danny nodded again. Gus said to his coffee, "He hit you because he'd lost." "I know," Ray said. "He knew it was over and he hit you anyway." "That's who he is," Ray said. "He doesn't stop when he's lost. He stops when he's stopped." "Federal process," Gus said. "Yes." "Months." "Yes." Gus turned his cup in his hands. The ring caught the amber light and held it for a moment, a thin band of gold in the diner light, worn smooth at the inside edge by 3 years of turning. "The boy," Gus said, not completing the sentence, not needing to. "Yeah," Ray said. "He's going to be all right." "He already is," Ray said. "That's not a future thing. He already is." Gus looked at the window, at the dark parking lot, and the line of bikes outside and the highway beyond. His mother, Gus said. She's strong, Ray said. She's been managing this alone for a long time. That's not easy, and she's been doing it without backup, without anyone. He paused. She'll be different now. Not because of us, because she knows what different looks like. That's all anyone needs to know, Sal said from across the table without looking up from his coffee. You're going to fix more than the door. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a statement. It was Sal, which meant it was the plainest possible version of the truth as he saw it, delivered without ornament. Ray looked at him. Probably, Ray said. Sal nodded, looked back at his coffee. Good, he said. The woman came back and refilled the cups without being asked and left a plate of toast in the center of the table because she'd been doing this long enough to know that men who came in at this hour without ordering food were people who had forgotten to eat and would need to be reminded. She went back to the counter and the kitchen sounds resumed and the diner ran itself quietly around them. Ray ate a piece of toast. Outside the highway, inside the amber light and the coffee and the sound of the griddle and the four of them in the booth with the weight of the day distributed between them in the way that weight was distributed in groups that had been through things together. Not evenly, not fairly, but absorbed, shared, carried collectively in the way that made each individual share bearable. Gus said after a while, "When you talk to Carver." "Tomorrow," Ray said. "Take me." Ray looked at him. "He should hear it from both of us," Gus said. "What we have, what the deputy gave us. He should hear it from people who were there." He paused. "He's been in that chair 2 years thinking it was bad luck. Finding out it was Maddox is... He's going to need to put his hands on something real, on people who know what it means." He turned the ring. "Take me." Ray looked at him for a moment. "All right," he said. Gus nodded. They ate toast at a diner in Kern County while the night moved toward morning and Mason Street slept its complicated sleep, and Tommy sat on his bike at the end of the block watching the house where a woman breathed more easily than she had at 2 o'clock, and a boy slept without nightmares because he had exhausted the day fully and completely, and his body had decided that was enough for now. At some point, Sal said he was going to find the bathroom, and Danny asked the woman for more toast, and Ray sat with his coffee going cold and looked out the window at the bike line and thought about what Sal had said. You're going to fix more than the door. He'd meant it the way Sal meant things, factually, without judgment, simply naming what he'd already observed. Ray was going to be on Mason Street again. He was going to fix the things that were broken and learn which things couldn't be fixed and provide what he could provide, and he was going to do this because a 7-year-old boy had stepped in front of his motorcycle and said 3 words, and the machinery of who Ray Callahan was had responded to those words in a way that didn't have an off switch. He'd spent a long time before the club trying to be useful in contexts that didn't want him. The work he'd done before. The ways he'd tried. The doors that had been closed. Different doors than Owen's, but closed in the same way, by the same mechanism. The mechanism of people deciding that a man who looked like Ray Callahan didn't belong in the category of useful. He'd stopped trying to convince people. He'd found other ways to be useful. Tonight, he'd been useful in a parking lot and in a hospital corridor and on a porch with a deadbolt kit at midnight. He would be useful tomorrow in Carver's living room, delivering news that would hurt and that Carver deserved to have. He would be useful in the weeks after that, as the federal case built slowly and the complaint dissolved and Holt sat across the street with the growing knowledge of what he'd done, and Maddox's infrastructure developed the cracks that chains developed when you found all the links. Useful was enough. It had taken him a long time to understand that. That useful was enough. That you didn't need to be recognized or credited or welcomed in order to show up and do the thing that needed doing. You just had to show up. You had to not look away when a kid stepped in front of your motorcycle. Everything else followed from that. At 1:37 in the morning, Ray paid the check. The woman thanked him in the clipped, genuine way of someone who worked nights and meant it when she said it. And he said nothing and left more than he needed to because that was something he did when service had been real. They went out into the cold. The bikes were cold-started at this hour, the engines taking an extra moment to find their rhythm, the exhaust visible in the night air as white vapor rising and dispersing. Ray pulled his jacket closer. The bruise on his cheekbone had settled into its full color now, visible even in the parking lot light. Deep purple blue, the color of something that had been hit hard and had absorbed it and would carry the mark for exactly as long as it took to heal, no longer and no shorter. He put his helmet on. He looked at the highway, at the dark line of it stretching both directions. He thought about the September afternoon that had started with heat and ended here, with cold air and coffee and toast, and the particular quiet that came after a thing had been done and before the next thing began. He started the engine. Gus pulled up beside him, Danny and Sal behind. They sat for a moment, idling, the four of them in the parking lot, with the highway ahead and the diner light behind, and the night around them enormous and cold and entirely indifferent, the way nights were. Then Ray pulled out. The others followed. The highway took them east, away from Bakersfield, away from Mason Street, away from the hospital and the parking lot and the complaint filed in the county system and the access logs traveling north in a woman's handbag. The engines ran their deep, sustained note, the sound that was not music exactly, but had the quality of something intentional, something that moved through the air and left it altered. Behind them, the diner's amber windows shrank and disappeared. Ahead, the highway. And in a tan house on Mason Street, Owen Barrett slept in his bed with one of the two big wool socks on and one fallen off, and his mother slept in the next room with her prescription on the nightstand and Ray Callahan's card in her pocket and both lungs working the way they were supposed to, and the front door was locked with a lock that held, and at the far end of the block, Tommy sat on a cold motorcycle and watched the street and saw nothing that needed watching for. And the street light at the corner ran its steady orange light over the asphalt and the chain link and the strip of dead grass and the closed windows of the houses where the people slept, who had watched from behind their curtains and chosen to stay inside. In the morning, Mason Street would wake up and look the same way it always did. The same yards, the same porches, the same cars, and the same driveways. Frank Holt would make his coffee and stand at his window and feel the specific weight of someone who has put his name on something he cannot take back. And he would carry that weight into the day and every day after it while the system did what systems did, slowly and imperfectly and without satisfaction. And Owen Barrett would wake up and eat breakfast and go to school on Monday and come home and put his shoes by the door and call for his mother and hear her answer from the kitchen, the sound of her there, the most ordinary sound in the world, and he would stand in the hallway for a moment just listening to it before he went in. He would not talk about the day for a long time, not because it hurt, or not only because it hurt, but because he was still understanding it, still turning it over. The way you turn something over in your hands when you know it's important and you're not ready to put it down. He would understand it eventually, in pieces. The way understanding came, not all at once, not in a revelation, but in the slow accretion of experience that gave the past its proper weight. He would understand that the men on the motorcycles were not heroes in the way that word usually meant. They were not untouched or unbroken or simple in their goodness. They were men who had made choices and carried marks and lost things, and kept moving anyway because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was not in them. He would understand that the neighbors who had closed their doors were not evil, not most of them. They were frightened, which was not the same thing, and he would spend years deciding how he felt about that distinction and would arrive at a place that was not quite forgiveness and not quite condemnation, but something in between that he would eventually call understanding, which was the most honest word for the complicated thing it was. He would understand that his mother was braver than he had known, had been managing things alone for longer than he had seen, and that the day she went down on the bedroom floor was not the day she stopped being strong, but the day she let someone else be strong beside her, which was a different and harder thing. And he would understand, most of all, that the most important thing he'd done on that September afternoon was not the running or the stopping of the motorcycles or the 3 words he'd said or the way he'd sat in a hospital waiting room and told the truth to an officer who needed to hear it. The most important thing he'd done was refuse to stop. Every closed door, every hesitation, every adult who had looked at him on a front step and decided not. He had turned away from each one and kept moving, kept looking, kept believing that somewhere there was a door that would open. And one had. And behind it were 12 men who had learned, in various ways and at various costs, that the only thing worse than the damage done to them was letting that damage be the reason they looked away. They hadn't looked away. and so he hadn't either. Courage, Owen Barrett would understand when he was old enough to name it. Not heroism, not the absence of fear, not the certainty of outcome, was the thing that kept your feet moving on hot asphalt when you had nowhere left to run except toward something large and unknown and possibly dangerous. It was the willingness to believe, without proof, that somewhere ahead there was something that would come when called. He had believed it. And in a parking lot at a gas station on a burning September afternoon, 12 engines had gone quiet. Because he'd asked, and they'd heard, and that finally was the whole story.